Did you guys miss me while I was gone? They totally missed me. Welcome to RantCast 51. I am, of course, the magical Mr. Mephisto, the most dangerous man in Age of Sigmar. Joining me tonight is actually Shu from Rerolling Ones. You know him for his rapid-fire wit and great cold opens, and mad painting skills. How's it going, Shu?
It's going well, sir. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. This is actually this is another one of Jack's great ideas. So if it goes, depending on how it goes, you either make fun of him or steal all the credit, right? So like you.
Well, Jack really is the idea guy. He is the talent.
Okay. Yeah, see, I thought you wrote all the awesome cold opens.
Oh no. They're entirely a collaboration. So I'd love to steal the credit for it. I can't give it all to Jack either. But yeah, like they're almost entirely like one of us will come with an idea and the rest of us will riff on it, and then before we know it, a camera comes out and we have an intro.
See, they're one of my favorite. I mean, they're one of my favorite parts. Jack also said, I think when he was on RantCast, he mentioned bat reps tend to really grab newer players, and I just find myself I'll click through the bat reps, check the ending, but I'm always coming back for those cold opens. So that they're excellent. I even did one once upon a time on RantCast.
Nice.
So your genius has continued to inspire other folks. But before we get into tonight's topic, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about Soulbound, about RPGs in general, kind of making that transition from wargaming to RPGs. Soren popping off with 10 gift subs. Wow, the Mad Lad at it again. Thank you so much for those, my friend. Everyone enjoy your Mr. Meph emotes, especially the Nagash one, and especially go spam it in Rob Symes, the Honest Wargamers stream tonight later. Flood Dan unsupervised game and distract them completely. Let's get some players killed tonight in Soulbound and Down. Soren says, I love Rerolling Ones, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Love you back.
Nagash Husbando Pillow, by the way. Yeah, Nagash Husbando Pillow is best idea.
It is best idea.
It is best idea. We
had a little tiny trophy gave to Carrie. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So before we get into everything tonight, I just want to mention. I think this is technically the last RantCast stream for the month of May, which means this is the last video you will have the opportunity to comment on to get entered into that giveaway for new players. That box of Stormcast Eternals provided by the Mad Lad himself, Soren. Remember, it's for new players, or if you're trying to indoctrinate a new player. Leave a comment on YouTube on the VOD for this or any of my videos that you've watched in the month of May. You'll get entered into that giveaway. It'll be a random drawing. I said drawing. Everyone heard that right. Drawing. The random drawing. Lulu will actually come in and draw a hat. Yeah, my name is Simon. I like to do drawings. Nice SNL cut. Well done. Well done.
Sorry. Yeah, it was a joke grenade. It took you a second for it to go off.
No,
yeah.
I got it. Man, rabbit hole number one of the night. I can't even get through my shilling before. Did anyone read? I believe Tomb King Tristan shared it on Twitter, but it's been going around how the Stevie Nicks Fajita Roundup SNL bit came to be. Are you familiar with this? Oh my gosh. It's not, you can't find it on YouTube. It's not even on NBC's website or anything. You have to go to the Wild West that is Daily Motion to find the Stevie Nicks Fajita Roundup. But it's so good. 10 out of 10 do recommend. It's on my top 5 list. But yeah, enough about SNL. Giveaway. Leave a comment. Leave a comment below. Mention, hey, I'm new. Mention the giveaway. And give me a little bit of why you're trying to get into Age of Sigmar. If you're trying to indoctrinate your friend, obviously give me a bit of a spiel about them, and then we'll do that. But I've got one more somber announcement. I'm sorry, everybody. As many of you know, last week I was on Vince Venturalla's channel rather than my own to run the first adventure for our Soulbound game, the best damn Soulbound show ever. You might notice that someone is missing from Chat Gang tonight. That someone is in Cantabot. So my computer had a massive sort of meltdown. I had to do a clean install of Windows, and in Cantabot, who has been with me through about 7 years, 4 builds of a rig, 3 different apps because I programmed in Cantabot initially in IIRC, then jumped that over to Ankbot, and then finally in the Streamlabs chatbot. So Ripperoni in Cantabot. I will rebuild in Cantabot, but I think this is an opportunity to commemorate in Cantabot with a drawing contest. So you have about a week between now and the Ranties. Those are going to be June 6th. That's a Saturday at 7 o'clock Central. Send me some fan art on the Twitters, yo. And I'm gonna take my the secret committee will get together. They'll choose the best one, and the goal is to have fun. Draw what you think I think in Cantabot has always looked like. So I mean, maybe it's like Clippy, the Microsoft like thing, but with a wizard hat. Like, who knows? Maybe it's Kirby because because in Cantabot often does the Kirby dance. Like maybe it's Kirby. Like I don't know what. Maybe it's some wicked skeleton. Who knows? All right, but that's it. That's enough shilling for me tonight. How's it going, man?
It's going well. Now you got me on a tangent thinking about what incarnation my computers would be.
Yeah.
And they're pretty much just a funnel to send video games and horrible information into my brain. So I would think, like, at first, oh, it's a loyal dog. And then, no, it's pretty much a microscope that medically is fascinated with all the horrible things in the internet.
Yeah.
So,
see, I mean, think about that, like, the nature of relationship we have with our computers now. And especially now with, like... With the with COVID-19, we're all sort of like in our various forms of isolation. Different states and different countries all have their standards right now. But for the most part, there's this growing isolation, and the digital relationships we have. When I found out that, like, okay, I managed to keep my photos of my kids because I was all on one partition, right? And my partition was just fine. My OS was on a different drive, and when in Cantabot, like when I'm like, I was just like, oh shit. Like it was like the first thing I realized after I got everything up and working again and I got my streams going. I'm like, it's just a text document. That's all in Cantabot technically is. A plain text document with code, ifs and thens, right? And like I felt like I lost a friend. All it does is like, hey, if you like the stream, hit follow, and then it just dances. That's all. Like that's it. But it was heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that relationship we have with our computers. You actually, your most recent cold open on the Legion of Grief versus Order vid actually kind of played around with that a little bit. You wanna actually? We were kind of talking about the inspiration for cold opens at the start. You want to take a little bit through that actually?
Yeah. So the skit features basically a almost real life telling of me and Jack becoming reunited to hand off a miniature that I painted for him. I really did paint that miniature for him. He posted it in our team chat at one point, and I said, "Oh, I like that dude." He's like, "You want to paint him?" I said, "Sure." So I painted the guy, and I wanted to give it to him, but we've been a little like, how do we do this? Do I like put him on the ground and then walk off, and then you come up and then pick him up? And as we were talking about that, like, okay, this is just an intro. We just need to do this. So it's culturally relevant at the same time, painting the absurdities of what we're living in right now.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't even know what is going on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of in survival mode at this point. I'm done trying to like figure it out. I'm just like, I'm gonna try to survive. Keep not infect people with what could be the World War Z plague, do my responsible things, and just going like it's just been a survival mode for me. But it's a lot of like humor to get through everything. Like watching the funniest movies I can think of. For me, Firefly. I watch it once every year, all the way through, and sometimes I'll watch Serenity, but I don't. Serenity's not a real movie. It's a I don't know how to put it.
A derivative hunk of junk. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I just wanted to shoot it.
It's a fine movie. It's just like I don't like that it kills all possibility. That bothers me.
Yeah.
I like how the TV show ends where like they could still be out there, like still flying and doing stuff, but around the time you like kill off two of the major characters and say like, yeah, this is. I'm like, I would rather think about what could be than be told like it's not coming back. So I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah. The power potential is really strong, isn't it? Like, the minute I saw the concept of a midichlorian described to me on the silver screen, I was like, wait, so I'm not actually a Jedi? There's no chance? I have to have this bug in my blood?
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Like, that's completely, like, you could hear it palpably shatter in the room. All these people that had that little fantasy that somewhere deep in their world they could have been a Jedi, but that's gone because you need this blood bug in your system.
Yeah, like Jedi. Space algae, basically. It's the Akira thing.
Yeah, the power of fantasy. It's like let us have that doubt. Let us have that little thing to hang on to.
Yeah.
That maybe we'll get more.
Right. I think that you're onto something there. Like the mystery, you should never explain every mystery in any fiction. And this is going to be a tip when we start talking about building your campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
This is important to remember. Your players may want explanations for everything. Don't give them all to them. Explain the stuff. Let them uncover mysteries and truths and stuff like that. But you never want to fully explain everything. Because, I mean, Stephen King's got a fantastic quote, and I'm going to change one word in it to make it more applicable. But he says that explanation is anathema to the poetry of, and I'd say storytelling. That, he says to the poetry of fear, but for me it's the poetry of storytelling. But storytelling is about suspense and payoff. And Hitchcock's a fantastic master of suspense because he plays with that nature of mystery, what the character knows versus what the audience knows, and like is constantly pulling on those two chords back and forth. When you're GMing, that's what you're doing, except your audience is also the actors. And so it's an even more delicate balance of like the sort of push-pull. Now, one thing that really works for you in an RPG sense that may not work in movies and books is the suspension of disbelief is like instantaneous. Because it's a game, you're like just plugged in and sucked in. You can paint really broad stroke stories, and the player's absurdity will, I mean, it can just be as simple as go save the princess. Or like get the magic item to the cave. Like you can do basic stories like that, and since the characters will always be some form of absurd or some form of conflicted or some form of like over the top, they'll be able to make that story even better as you kind of riff off of them.
Yeah. It's interesting as a as a GM, you might not always know the answer to the thing. Like, so you can seem cryptic, like you have a big master plan, but you have not actually figured that out yet. That's okay. Your players don't know. It's like the classic, nobody knows you're drunk until you do something. And that makes everybody know you're drunk. Right. So but I would recommend that, like, there are methods out there. You can look into this stuff, and I can describe a few of them for you. That there are mental calisthenics that help you memorize little story beats better. It's one of the first things you learn when you do improv. For example, if any of you have done improv, comedy or drama or otherwise, or you can just take notes. So if like there's a story beat that happens, like a player broke a fountain out of frustration, and you just write that down, because later on the guards might come out and be like, "Hey, you gonna pay for that fountain?" And it could have been like 2 hours ago, and people are like, "Wait, what?" And it's like, you broke this fountain, you have to pay. That kind of thing. You don't need to be an expert GM to fit these story beats in, or even have all the answers. But taking notes of the interesting things that happen can turn into those moments that turn into big answers for the story.
Well, I mean, some of your best story beats come 100% from the players. I'd posit, my best stories have always, the core big payoff climaxes and scenes are very rarely my own, like, pre-planned events. especially since if you try to railroad players toward your pre-planned events and your stuff, what's better is you kind of like, you want to be sitting in the roller coaster with your players, I find, and then like have billboards of your events up around the railroad tracks that you like. Sometimes if you get close, you wave at it, but if you miss that one for like a more interesting loop, you just stay on the player's roller coaster. You know, like you nudge them and you guide them, but you'll find you can work your story is never so grandiose. You can't get to it from a different direction. You know, if you have like this big payoff scene, you're like, I must reveal that the king is evil, right? Like, I have to do this. This is the big story moment I've been building up toward. And you're just like, well, how does the king reveal that it's evil? Because, like, the party's just been, like, partying and high-fiving the king this whole time. Well, actually, you've just given yourself a fantastic problem to solve. Right. With the players now, and you've changed that direction now. Now, maybe is the king really evil? Or was it the brother now? Because, like, the party clearly loves the king. You know, like, or, you know, you by being able to, like, improv and kind of moving with the players' motions, like, that's where you're really gonna... It's the you're yes-anding your players, really, is what it comes down to. Yes, exactly. you're yes-anding your players, really, is the best way to put it.
So for those of you watching who don't know what that means, just, you want to try not to say no or hard stop your players when they have some kind of inspiration. You want to follow that inspiration with them and see how that might mutate your story to a point where you can't handle it. But it's just like if you see somebody playing, I think it was Oblivion. I was playing, and this lady comes out and she's like, "I need your help. There's an ogre eating all my onions," and I'm like, "Oh, goodbye." Like, that's a you problem, and like that has to be like okay. And if you need to bring that back, like, no, you guys really do need to go sort these ogres out. You got to add, you know, something else other than this lady's onions are really important.
Right, right.
They're not.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's a little bit of like a social contract when it comes to RPGs. You know, like if I describe a note falling to the floor, you know, usually the party is going to pick up the note and read it, right?
Yeah.
That's not always the case, though. Sometimes you describe the note, but then, like, two players are just, like, they're thick in each other's RP. They're, like, back and forthing. Well, like, you know, you can rein that in a little bit, but kind of also then facilitate that, and, like, maybe now that becomes the catalyst for something.
Yeah. I mean, every hero journey starts with, like, what your ordinary world is, and then you have this call to action, and then there's, like, the stakes at play. Like, what happens if you say no? Like, you know, I don't want to do this. So as a GM, you can either force them into it, be like, oh, well, you're blackmailed, you have to go. Or somebody's holding somebody you love hostage. Or it could be no, it really seems like the right thing to do, which can be fun if you have a party, especially in like Soulbound, where your good guy characters are not necessarily good people, right? So your call to action might actually be refused by your players, and they're still in character. So that can be kind of a fun thing to work around. I don't know. I enjoy working through those kinds of problems. I think other people who might be considering running a game of Soulbound might be terrified of that, or if they've only done wargaming and haven't done any like RPGs or improv or whatever, that also might be pretty scary for them. Mm-hmm. So a good place to pull inspiration would be, you know, maybe from battle plans in the AOS books. They describe a scenario of why two people might be fighting, and it's really easy to take that and work that into, you know, the call to action. Mm-hmm. Just as an example.
Yeah. So do you want to walk this maybe back to, like, well, how, you know, Soulbound has brought up like a really interesting good problem to have. Is a lot of people who have either played RPGs and kind of like haven't in a while, or like they had an interest in RPGs but never got the opportunity to, or people who had no interest whatsoever are now like, oh, you know, I might check out this Soulbound thing. So like, you have these wargamers to varying degrees, with varying degrees of experience in RPGs, suddenly more interested in getting into an RPG. How do you think you build that bridge from wargame to RPG?
So this takes a little bit of background, I think. Like, right off the bat, the path that I'm seeing, especially for the youngest people I see coming into the hobby, it's usually video games like Total War leads them into Warhammer, and then from that they're going to discover Soulbound or discover RPGs as they get further down that rabbit hole. I mean, RPGs in general are vastly more popular than wargaming.
Yes.
So generally speaking, this isn't a problem, but it, for those of you who are facing this kind of challenge, like how do you introduce people to it? There was a a book released by Games Workshop in 2002 called Skirmish, and it was not their first Skirmish book, but it was clearly their best, in my opinion, where they had talked about each scenario involves 1 or 2 miniatures, and they usually had like a 2-foot by 2-foot terrain board, and you use miniatures, and it described the scenario very cleanly. Like, you have 1 Bretonnian knight, 1 paladin on foot, and 1 Troggoth who is keeping them from crossing a bridge. Like, this is literally Billy Goat's Gruff. But it's a scenario that you're playing out with your wargame models on terrain that's still very visual and visceral for the people who just want to get in there, crush monsters, and roll dice and get loot. So it's a little bit like performing electronic music. I think RPGs are as hard on you as you want them to be. Like, you can have some of this stuff be automatic, where you're using miniatures, and where am I in the room is obvious because you can just look down at the physical representation of your character, and that's done. Or it can be as hard on you as you want, where you're playing via Discord with somebody thousands of miles away, and you only have the depths of your imagination to describe the scenario. And for the GM, they have to keep a very dense mental picture of what the scene looks like, and they have to be keeping track of where players are in the room and where the monsters are in the room and that kind of thing for all the combat. They have to be able to answer questions of the players who are interrogating the scene. Like you say, oh, I walk into a blacksmith's. It's not a lair. What blacksmith's workshop. You walk into a blacksmith's workshop. The blacksmith owes you money. You have no weapons. So you're going to improvise with something there. A player might say, oh, I'm going to grab a hot poker and attack the guy. Well, this kind of goes back to the whole, try not to say no to your players, but keep them kind of reined in for what's going on. I don't want to give them too much power, an enchanted hot poker or whatnot. Right. Or if that stuff sounds super intimidating for you, use your Warhammer models and set up a little scene and say, this is what we're doing right now. We are in this village, or we're in this camp, or, we are at this, and describe the scenario physically. I feel like that is going to be, the fact that we all have models for it already is going to be a big advantage for players getting into Soulbound. You can find a model that represents your dude and paint that dude, and it'll be awesome, and it'll give you a really strong and personal invested connection to that character. And then I think that right there gives Warhammer players a huge leg up over the traditional RPG players who started in their imaginations and discovered miniatures later.
So you're kind of saying work with what you got, in a sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, if you want to just take my belated crap and boil it down to something useful, there you go. Work with what you got.
I think Heretics here has revisited my dilemma of the king was the bad guy, and I don't want to reveal it. But I was being non-specific, but in that situation, to answer like my own question, I would really read the room. Why did I want the king to betray the party, right? Or the king to be the bad guy? Like, it goes back to, for me, I'm very I think a lot about motivations. In acting, or it's very similar in writing, which is, I'm actually like a writer, storyteller side of things, and I have since, that's been my bridge into basically everything else. But like in acting, it's what's the scene? What does this character want in the scene? What's stopping them from getting it? That's what you ask yourself every scene to scene every time. And that's going to build natural conflict. I was watching a movie the other day, and I could see the beats like A Beautiful Mind, just like did it like that. It was still a really good movie, even if it was like the most basic version of that formula I've ever seen. It was an indie film. I can't even recall the name of it. Had oh man, I can't even remember. It was on Hulu. Whatever. It was suggested. I just clicked the play button. This is what COVID is doing to my mind. Like, oh yeah, it's just another movie I watched. It was funny.
You're so experienced, you don't even see the code anymore. You just see,
Yeah.
blonde, brunette, redhead.
Yeah, that's right. The Matrix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and that's what's happening is but in terms of one of the greatest advantages for me for RPGs over any other storytelling, short of essentially improv, is that like you're kind of always actively in a sort of writer's room collaborating. You're always in that collaborative mode. Now you might be the head writer in the room, but you're always in this collaborative mode where someone says, like, just from the back of the room, what if Stevie Nicks opens a taco hut? Like, and then you're like, yeah, look at that, coming back to the original tangent.
Call back.
Yeah.
Hey, it's for you.
Yeah, it's a callback. And then you just go, that's awesome. And then like someone else in the room is like, yeah, so she's like singing a song like, there you go again, you say you want burritos. Well, who am I to tell you no? And then they start riffing on the lyrics. Like, you're doing stuff like that. As a GM, you're as much a support role as you are a source of conflict, though. And that, I think, is really important. This notion of cooperative GMing versus what is known as adversarial GMing, right? Mm-hmm. Where, I think stories hit a lot of, it's like a good sundae. You want to hit a lot of the flavors. You don't want just vanilla. So you want the players to feel let down, sometimes. Because, but you need to remember, why should my players feel let down in this scene? Because the triumph later on, they're going to get that bigger high from that triumph later on. Like, you need to be cognizant of that. Which, and I'm gonna send this back at you, with Age of Sigmar, it is competitive. It is a version of competitive. There's a win condition most oftentimes. Like you talked about. Yeah,
there's a winner and a loser. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about like skirmish being a really good like sort of starting point. When you're the GM, how do you combat that? Like, what if you're like you're an experienced like player of RPGs. You've got like that group of like 3 friends that like have played RPGs to a varying extent, but they are war gamers, Yeah. And so they're going to come in with their wargamer mentality, which might be this notion of, there's a winner and a loser. Do you think that's a barrier to crossing that bridge over to RPGs? And if so, how would you kind of deal with that?
I think, so for me, I know I'm cheating a little bit here because I know you also love the storyteller systems from White Wolf. Mm-hmm. Those were by far my favorite RPGs of all time. And one of the things as a storyteller I would do, that's the GM of the White Wolf system. As a storyteller, I would attempt to say right off the bat, we're going to do a story together. This is, as you said, collaborative. And your character's not important. What matters here is that we all walk away from this experience with a story that will be fun for us to retell. And so the story is the character. The story is the thing that we're not going to kill. So I'm not going to guarantee players are going to survive, but I will guarantee that if you do die, it will be because it's a tragedy, or it will be hilarious, or it will be because you're tired of that dude and want to roll another one.
I like that. It's because you become you suddenly find yourself wearing the red shirt, and it's time for you to or
the Spock going into the reactor, right? I mean, there's a couple of different moments there where you can lock in and say, okay, it's time. It's time. Yeah. And it should be something that is the player should feel complicit in. They should feel, not should. I don't want to say should. That's me prescribing some kind of authoritarian, like your RPG needs to do this. It doesn't. But I find that your players will be more on board for this wild stuff if that is their objective. If you guys all share the same objective. So, a wargamer trying to win in an RPG. Let me just tackle that question real quick.
Yeah.
There are some people that are super against power gaming and super against min-maxing and whatnot. It's fine. And they just want to not roll dice even. Like there's a couple of diceless systems like Amber and that kind of thing. The Amber Chronicles. The thing I want to remind people of, have you heard of that?
What's not rolling dice in a role-playing game? No, go on.
I've got the book out. I have to fish it out of the closet, but it's an artifact. Let me tell you. Anyway, the big picture here is that it's okay to let your player have a goal and then achieve it. It's okay. Yes. It really is.
Yeah.
in the next set of campaign or the next chapter or however you want to do it, you can move the goalpost a little bit further. It's okay for them to go into the next campaign or go into the next chapter feeling awesome about themselves. I did it. I found the artifact for my church, or I found, I reunited these people who have been lost forever, or I recovered the remains of my elders, right? Like all these things, like it's okay to get the thing and move on to the next step. If you look at a game like, let's be super reductive for a second. Look at a video game like Left 4 Dead. Everybody starts off with, a pistol or something. Mm-hmm. And then as you're going around, you pick up a weapon, but there's only usually one of those. So there's an Uzi, but there's only one. It's going to go one of the 4 players. You got to kind of work it out amongst yourselves who's going to get it. And usually nobody cares because the power up the new weapon is going to be just around the corner anyways. And by the end of the scenario, everybody has something that they're happy with. As they're going along, if the game had taken reservation with itself about going, I don't know, is the Uzi too powerful right here? No. Press A. There's zombies coming at you. Like, shoot them in the head. That's not what the story's about. So a wargamer trying to win in an RPG, they might say, okay, I'm going to win if I have the best Sigmarite armor and a crazy wild mount that nobody's seen before. I'm riding a Skeksis from Dark Crystal, and I have a laser gun for that fell through warp space, and I've got a las cannon or whatever on my Stormcast. Like, okay, go bananas. Set whatever goal you want. That is super not important. What is important is where they're taking that story, what they do with those things. Mm-hmm. And as the challenge for the GM is to keep their interest once they are powerful. Right. I found that actually is, so it's fear that keeps me from rewarding my players, and that's BS, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's important for a GM to recall to really hone in and realize that you are a player as well. This notion that like the GM is somehow separate from the players, like that's that's always been like just sort of odd, like an odd sort of mental barrier you don't need. When you go into an RPG, you are a player, which might actually be an advantage wargamers have because like that you're all players.
Yeah. Well, you remember that scene in Fight Club where the guy gets pinned down by the dude, by the cook, mm-hmm. and he says, "We are the cleaners. We are your chefs. We are your." I'm like, oh, he's a GM.
Yeah, he's a GM. Love it.
He's everybody else.
So you mentioned something kind of going into this. You mentioned skirmish first, and you started talking about like the sort of how they have like almost like this narrative thing going on with their. But narrative, I don't like narrative. I want to win trophies, man. Yeah. How do I like? I think that if you're interested in an RPG, you've already conceded that you're willing to be told a story in some sense. But do you think that there is a stigma like that, like RPGs or people who want to play RPGs but also play wargamers, like you can't be competitive and play narrative or narrative? If you're a narrative player, you're going to be a better RPG gamer. Do you think there's anything along those lines that like a bias?
Yeah. So I like to have a rule that says your fun is not wrong. So usually at every gaming table I sit down for an RPG, there's like 6 people or whatever. One of them is going to be super into the story and wants to have a tragic romance or whatever, unrequited love, or save some kind of save a noble. Yeah. And there's another person who just wants to roll dice, crush monsters, and have them explode into piles of loot. Mm-hmm. That they're both okay. So you have to be able to, as the person who's running the game, you have to be able to give each of those players enough kind of screen time to get that worked out, mm-hmm. to get that out of their system. And I think that it's for somebody who's just like trying to avoid the weirdness or the awkwardness of pretending to be someone else, which by the way, it does take some time to get over that as an adult, unless you have small kids around and you're used to just being a goof. It is hard to be suddenly transport your brain into okay, now I'm an elf. What does that mean? What does that even mean? Well, it means roll these 3d6 and hit that goblin in the face and tell me what happens. Like, start there, go simple, use miniatures, and then over time, you'll start to realize that you're moving the miniatures around on the board with the same directives that the character would have. Mm-hmm. And that is your gateway. That is when you start to realize you are you're getting into the head of your character and you're realizing, okay, my character's a coward, and that's okay. Or you realize there's something about your character that surprises you.
Yeah. Well, this is so like character development and character writing tricks. Give your character a quirk. This is a really easy this is a really easy improv trick that anyone you can pick up as a writer's trick. House MD with was it Hugh Laurie, fantastically acted, brilliant series. Giving House a cane, brilliant character step. You think about that as a player character who's like, oh, I'm gonna play the wizard who solves every problem with science magic, because that's it. House is a wizard. He's the int 20 wizard, except his magical tomes are medical journals.
Well, not only the cane is a brilliant touch in storytelling. Also, I just you point out a really good one, so I want to take a second to admire it.
Yeah.
The cane is a visual reminder of the fact that he's in pain all the time.
Yes.
And that's literally his character. He's in pain all the time. So he literally struggles with this late in the show, and it pulls him away from everything he's dedicated his life to chase not being in pain anymore.
Yeah, the narcotics and stuff as they come up.
Yeah. And he really struggles with that in the show. That is something that that's a character defining moment. That's not just I picked a quirk on my talent sheet here so I can take 2 extra points in charisma. Yeah. Right. So I'm not very fast, but I'm good looking. It can turn into something that is role defining.
Yeah. This is the sort of thing where especially early on you go, okay, quirky, he's got the cane, he's kind of sarcastic, but as that plays out, that quirk like you said becomes defining of conflicts later on. So this is my advice to players: is give a player a flaw. It doesn't need to be a major soul defining flaw, but you'll find yourself by I like to make characters smokers. Just so that when because when they're doing something, I like to talk about them lighting a cigarette, or you go into a bar and you see a no smoking sign, oh, my character lights a match on the no smoking sign and lights a cigarette. Giving yourself things to do that aren't combat related when you're building that character. Mm-hmm. Anything. My character is a voracious reader. She always has a romance novel tucked into the lapel of her coat. Things like that, where you're you can take some minor non-combat feature or quirk, and those little things will help you kind of get into the mindset of your character. They start out a little bit as cosmetic details that you just go to every now and then. Mm-hmm. And as that game develops, as you get more comfortable with that character, you begin to know them and you begin to expand. Suddenly it's not just my character's a my character's a smoker. My character's actually an addict, and he covers up his pain with his scorn, and then you start to develop. Well, it's not just and you can go in any directions with these sort of things. So
yeah, it's true. Some of the most classic characters have been that way. But yeah, that's interesting. I was just looking at the Soulbound contents. I know in the storyteller system they had the concept of merits and flaws, which would be you take some kind of quote unquote flaw, and then that would give you more points to put elsewhere in your character. But it would make certain things impossible for you. Now in Vampire, some of the flaws were automatic, the Nosferatu clan are visibly disfigured. Mm-hmm. So it makes a lot of a lot of those social interactions difficult, or changes them. So trying to think, does Soulbound have anything like that?
They don't really have flaws per se.
It's
even
2020, man.
What's that?
It's 2020, man.
Yeah. Well, it's a different. The tone of Soulbound is very much the King. It's Justice League. It's Avengers. It's very heroic in scope. So they don't really bake flaws into the features of the mechanics of the game, but I do encourage you to think of flaws as character features and not mechanical things anyway, which is what I don't like about VTM, because you always find in older editions of VTM, I'm just starting to scratch the surface of 5 right now as I world build and stuff, But in revised, for instance, you would just take the same 4 or 5 flaws that weren't really flaws; they just made you cooler, so that you had more character creation points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're like, oh no, like I don't have a reflection. Oh, so bad. Like I'm a vampire. Like, like you just like do stuff like that where you just so you get more. And I actually advise against mechanical flaws giving you a merit. I think character flaws is where it's at. Character flaws are quirks. You know, it doesn't have to be a flaw. It can be something simple. If you don't want to play a tragic hero, don't give yourself a tragic quirk. Give yourself something funny. You know, like eat it. Goku eats all the damn time, right? Like this is a quirk of Goku's character. Anime is a pretty good resource for like what character quirks look like taken to 11. So like Goku.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like
taken to 11.
Yeah, just they're always really exaggerated. So you have some stuff like that. So yeah, like you don't. My brain jumps to some of the like kind of more negative quirks, I guess, from time to time, but they can be positive and weird quirks too. The reading and the eating, those things like that.
Yep. But I mean,
go ahead.
Terminal illness, like that's a great quirk to start with. Like that informs so much about your character's incentives. Mm-hmm. Are they risk averse? Are they trying to live the best of their final days? Mm-hmm. What is it like? How is that character handling that? You know, that's an example of a role defining, like right out of the box. Like, hey, you have this super interesting thing that's going on.
Yeah, I had a character whose quirk was essentially he was looking for his arch nemesis. Like he didn't have one. He was just always looking for his arch nemesis. So he went into everything like looking for the big bad or this like the. So what ended up happening is I had this like super over the top, really daring character. But like he would like, and it's, you know, when you take that character and you put him in a party with people who are like leaning like sort of selfish and kind of evil, you just have this interesting chemistry with the party where like they just want to get paid and he's just looking to go fight the biggest guy in the room or like and
yeah,
so you build an interesting party dynamic that way.
Yeah. Until he finds a love interest who's like, I just want to die in battle. And you're like, wait, what?
Well, but then now as a GM, you've created conflict for him. Like, he finds out that his greatest arch nemesis is the woman of his dreams. And so, like, now he has conflict. Like, look at that. Like, you know, like, you build up to that reveal a few sessions down the line or, you know, a few months down the line, and boom, you have this golden story arc. Like, you know.
Yep.
So... That one. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't even want to tackle having a love interest, how to make that easy when you're trying to have a romance scene with your buddy who's running the show for you. If you don't have any kind of like, if you don't have a background of role playing together, it's hard to go, yeah, this person's your love interest.
I mean, that's what that's what I use the veil a lot for. So like I'll like the screen fades to black for like super romantic moments. You know, you can describe like you can step out of like you can step out of first person and move into third person. I mean, it's really the comfort of what your player comfort levels are, and you as a GM as well, because remember you're a player too. This comes from expectation and session 0. So do you have any? So like you kind of mentioned, you know, talking about like coming over from Wargaming, coming and playing, you know, the person who just wants to like hit loot piñatas, watching them explode into gold coins, and somebody who really wants to like save the noble, and the person who's really invested in the story and always asks about history of something. I haven't thought of any history for this like this tavern, but you said the name, and there's the player who just wants to know everything about your world, and you're like, dude, I have like 2 sentences in a notebook about this entire town. Like, yeah, but you just said this interesting thing, so like, you know, what's the mining like? And then like you have to make everything up on the fly. Don't be afraid of stuff like that, by the way. But you have these players all with different desires from the game. Part of what can help everybody, is setting expectations, and GMs tend to do this through something called Session 0. Do you have like a good riff on what Session 0 is, and some things to go into Session 0 with, and what you're trying to do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually more familiar with it in terms of turn zero for Age of Sigmar, where you basically agree on the kind of game you're having. You say, are we taking this super serious? Like, I'm going to use all of the rules of this game in an attempt to defeat you and, give you as much of a challenge as possible? Or is it we're going to put miniatures on the table and roll this dice, and I'm going to try to finish this game before I get drunk? Like, that's going to be, like, you have to basically decide the kind of game you're having. So, I guess in turn zero or in session zero, you're doing things like making characters, you're deciding on your origins, you're working out maybe short role play, one-to-one scenarios with your players about, maybe they had some kind of conflict or they had some kind of, they were fired from a job or something, and you want to actually see what that conversation looked like. So you might role play with them a little bit about that moment in their life, that defining moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the aim of it, I think, is to help inform the players about what their motivations are as characters in their next step for the following sessions. Now, maybe I'm over-defining session zero for you here. Do you want to jump in?
No. I like that you mentioned the turn zero to AOS, because this is one of those great bridge moments. Like, establishing what everybody wants out of the game. And, like, if I as a GM want to run the political intrigue game, right? And political intrigue, I'd never do it. But say, hypothetically speaking, I want to run the political intrigue game. I need a party of players who want to play a political intrigue game. The person who's obsessed with the history of the town and like why it's got a mining background when it's located in this geographical setting, versus the one who wants to rescue the noble. Okay, I might have the one who wants to rescue the noble, and the one who wants to hit people and watch them explode into loot probably is going to be engaged in that game, right? Yeah. So you need to, even as a GM, whatever type of game you intend to run, you want to like make sure that you got people on board for that type of game. Now, I as a GM tend to be a lot flexible. Like, I ask my players what type of game they're interested in. Like, is this the type of game where you want to solve every problem with violence? Cool. Like, I will every problem solved with violence. So, like, now you have the political intrigue campaign where they really can just walk up and punch Littlefinger in the mouth. Like, and like, solve all the problems. Like,
I think it's entirely possible to play an RPG like a war game, where you just have models on a table and you're just crushing numbers. Like, that's the mechanics suit it. It's fine. It fits.
Yeah. Like, I think there's a little bit of like this fear of pretension when it comes to RPG that might be a barrier for when you're a wargamer versus an RPGer. And like you said, like, the pool of people who play RPGs is much bigger than wargaming. Wargaming is a much more niche market. All the numbers in the world suggest that. So that's where like my aim is. Like, I know that I've played RPGs for a very, very long time. I never want to like ever squelch someone's interest wanting to come into RPGs from war games, because I know like they're kind of in that niche thing. The last thing they need is someone telling them like, no, you can't come have fun. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah. Try to stick on the end of the profile of someone's fun is not wrong, and try to give them enough attention. Right. That's really the aim. I mean, it takes some humility to step down off of a horse and say, well, okay, maybe this person who just wants to crush monsters is not going to ruin my improv drama for the night, and get into it.
Yeah, and if you have like you have that one improv drama session, you can like, okay, that player might check out that night, but like tomorrow night you just like, okay, like improv drama, and the improv drama sets up like going and assassinating the dude, right? And so now that guy who just wants to punch face is like, oh yeah, like now they're interested. You can reward that too, like in session to session. So I guess, how do you've mentioned this a few times now, is like giving players sort of their due attention and being sure to like sort of divide your attention between your players. I mean, that's just a real general tip. This doesn't necessarily go to like the bridge building thing, but this is just a really good tip to have for GMs. Do you have any good tricks that you have, or anything you can expand on that?
Yeah, I've got a 2-minute sand hourglass that I use. I'm like, okay, we're going to do this person's thing. I'll start the clock. And that gives me a good visual indicator, like, I need to wrap this up now. And then I switch over to the other person. I do that only because as I've gotten older, I have to be way more respectful of people's time. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not organized and I'm not trying my best to make sure that we're focused on the right thing, then I'm doing a bit of a disservice for the people who canceled important stuff to be there,
Mm-hmm.
or who are working really hard to be there.
Yeah.
That reminds me real quick of another tip, which is essentially set your game up into chapters. I like to plan my RPG sessions so that they are, I'll say, we're doing 6 sessions. You're only on the hook for 6 sessions. We're going to wrap up the story at the end of the 6th session. And if you want to keep going, we'll keep going. And we'll do another 6 or another 5 or whatever, or 4. If you're doing it weekly, just do 1 month groups or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It gives people a chance to drop in and out. It gives a lot more forgiveness for your campaign not suffering, or the people who, someone does drop out and everyone else wants to know how the story ends. You got to be able to fit that in. And when you're working with people who are busy, the time blocks are less forgiving for RPGs than they are for war games. You do need people's commitment for a period of time. So just kind of keeping it respectful. I keep an hourglass timer. That's basically the gimmick.
Yeah, that's the gimmick. You're gonna find a technique as a GM and as players that work for you, and as you build your rapport with your group. Just like with streaming, I've built up a mental cue that like I have to look around. You can watch me while I stream. Those of you in pure audio, you missed this. You'll see how I'm I keep my attention focused on the camera for the most part, but then I constantly kind of check back with chat. Because I've programmed an internal clock to do that, I'm terrible at dividing my attention. So I have to, at the table with players, do something similar. Just get in the habit of looking at each player's face, especially when one player's like talking. You're like, okay, I'm giving you the attention, you've got the scene, but then just checking in with each other player's face, just reading their expressions and seeing like what the vibe is in the room, what they're giving you. If one player's like on this RP tirade and everybody's laughing, you can let that energy go a little bit longer. You don't necessarily need to cut it off. Did we lose Shu? I think we lost Shu. So like that, building yourself some sort of trick or mental cue, I think, is a pretty important step. He seems to have disconnected, so I'll keep going here. I think that's a pretty important step for being a good GM. I know when I was even younger, I used to use what was called the clothespin technique, but I mean, that's very overt. You'd put the clothespin actually up on your GM screen with the player's name on it, whose turn it was, like, that you're giving attention to, and then you put up a clothespin and go around the table like that. But, like, that overt technique became an internal mechanic that I developed then, and from there, it didn't need to be the hard line. It could be a lot more fluid. But you want to give yourself a technique or something to build off of. That's going to help you. You can learn to improv by teaching yourself essentially shortcuts. We do this in Age of Sigmar. Your AOS reminder sheet gives you a lot of great reminders, but like eventually you get to a point where you're not checking your reminder sheet every single turn, every single action. You just go back to it when you need it because you've built in those mental cues. Improv is a lot of the same way. I like to write down 20 NPC names in my notebook every adventure, or realistically, I go back to the same page I wrote several adventures ago. But usually, every so many sessions, I refresh a list of about 20 names. So that if someone meets a character that I describe someone at the bar with an eye patch, and for whatever reason, for me it was a throwaway descriptor, but for the players, they're like, oh, eye patch dude at the bar. I really must talk to eye patch dude. I'm like, I didn't have a name for eye patch dude. Like, now I need to, like, oh, I just look over here, like, oh, his name is, like, Leovard. Because I just happen to have I have this list here. So you can teach yourself some, like, techniques that help you improv. And that's, that goes to, like, reading people's faces, just teaching yourself those intervals to check in with your players. I think that's very important. And it's gonna
Hey, can you hear me? My Discord.
Yeah, no, I hear you now. Can you hear me? Yep.
Good. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I saw you cut out, so I just had to keep the thought going. Like, he'll be back.
That.
He knows how this goes. He's a professional. Yeah, I mean, you don't, and that's the thing is, like, you don't really want to, like, confine yourself to that pure rhythmic thing, but you do need to give yourself some tricks that help you. And the idea is that, like, as you build up your tricks as a GM, as you build up your tricks as players, you can they all just kind of become another tool in your toolbox that you go to when you need it. And When you get really, really good, you only need one tool, and you can solve all the problems.
Yep.
Um,
It's funny. I learned this tool a while ago called Imagination Box. I wanted to share it. It's a really healthy tool for mental acuity in general, but it's good for GMs. And it's a bit of a dumb exercise, but here are the steps. It's called Imagination Box. The idea is you pretend you have a box in front of you, and you can do this like whenever, like just in the car or whatever. And you think of a topic, and then you reach into the box and you pull something out and you describe it that's related to the topic, and then you toss that thing over your shoulder. You like toss it, and then you reach in the box and get another one, and you look at it and you say what it is, and then you toss it. So if I say beach, you might go sand, toss, beach ball, toss, ocean, toss, waves, lifeguard, etc. You keep going through things that remind you, and eventually you run out. You run out of things that, like, okay, I've said everything I can think of. Some people are really good at just going and going at this. Some people need more structure. And the more you do this exercise of Imagination Box, the better you get at it. And so if you do something like medieval village, and you start to pull stuff out and look at it, like, okay, there's a blacksmith, there's the alchemist, there's, these are shops that you would see, but like, are the streets dirty? So you might think,
my first thing went to hay and cobblestone. Is like the
hay
first, yeah, those are my first two. As you're doing this, I'm like, hey, cobblestone. Yeah. Like I went to like the visuals, and then you immediately started populating with people, which I find just fascinating. How our brains went in two different directions right there.
Two different directions. Yeah. It's really good stuff. Like, your players are going to do the same thing. So when you say you enter the village and the gates have opened up, and a chicken clucks out of the way, and you see people milling around, everybody's got a different picture of what that scene looks like. I described it with pretty good detail, but everyone's got a different vision.
Yeah.
So some people are going to imagine the high-robed fantasy creatures from Neverending Story, and other people might envision, the dirt, muddy peasants from Life of Brian, right? Like,
yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I mean, go ahead, finish your point.
I was just going to wrap it up with basically what's going to sharpen you and help you answer questions when your players are interrogating your scene. It's going to is that information, is your imagination, your quick. I can think of things that are happening right here, right now, and even if you can't answer the questions, give the players something distracting they can think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a very firm believer of like painting the scene usually in broad strokes. If I set the scene like early on in an adventure, I'll go very literal and specific with the details. But as the adventure progresses on, my strokes get like broader unless I need the players to focus on a detail. Because usually it's like you said, like if I say like it's a dirty peasant walks up to you, like I don't need to describe like his bulbous nose and his bald head and like all these features, because like I just say dirty peasant, and your brain, you're gonna see like the kid on, like you see the kid running screaming up in Robin Hood Men in Tights, like you see you see like the life of you see the Monty Python like muck peasants, just like stacking filth, like everyone's brain is gonna like insert something else, and like allowing the players to have that like sort of agency over a lot of their own thoughts can be a lot of fun, because each one of their scenes, this is the nature of why books tend to be quote unquote better than the movies. There's several reasons, but one of them being is that like your imagination is so often unlimited by the confines of actors and space and time and all these things, that movies essentially rob you of your brain children. Like you have these like all these flights of fancy when you are imagining things. And even if it is just like a picture roll of other movies and other things that you've already consumed, it's not a bad thing if I start describing a character and you see, Jack Nicholson, right? In fact, if the whole party is like, so it's like Jack Nicholson except in Arbor, and then you, the GM, like now you pick up on that, and like now you start like maybe going into a little bit of a Jack Nicholson persona and hamming it up for them. Yeah, that just makes it better.
That's such an easy shortcut. It's good. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's you start picking up on those vibes by giving your players some sort of broad strokes. then picking up on the details they're picking up on, and then just leaning into them, you can really enrich the world in the game. Jack Nicholson, but in armor. Yeah, so he's hitting on the waitress. He's kind of like got a little bit of sleaziness to him. Like he's all just like suddenly he's just like you described him at the beginning of the scene holding a sword, and then just like midway through the scene he's actually holding like a whiskey tumbler, and you're just like, where'd the sword go? Oh no, he still got the sword. And so like like it's just like where's he keeping the whiskey tumbler? And you just never address it. Like things like that can really enhance your game depending on the tone you're going for. My brain goes silly, but your brain might go dark or to horror, or you can do this with horror and comedy. You can do this with any tone. Really the difference between, comedy and horror and drama is really what you're focusing on, which detail you're picking out, I always say where you're setting the camera. If you set the camera on people's reaction shots close in versus further out, like you see someone start to run versus you see their face, well up with tears, that's going to set two different tones. Same thing. Where do you set the camera? If someone runs, it could be comedic. They run away suddenly. If you just talk about them tearing, their face welling up with tears, now you're getting more on the tragedy or could be a horror axiom depending on what the inciting event was. So these are, this is just, I guess we're GMing 101 now.
I don't mean to do that. Yeah, I quickly went across here's how you can get started as a wargamer going into it, and it's because the picture I painted is very simple. You just set a couple of miniatures out on a table, and that answers all the questions about describing the scene. You can use paper cutouts as block-ins for your terrain. It's not that important. As long as people understand what's going on, their imagination will start to fill in the details.
That's true.
And that's the thing that I think I'm getting to here is that it's Soulbound definitely it definitely affords players to get in and just crunch numbers if that's what they want to do. It allows you to do that. It is so much more if you go deeper into the interactions between the players and their characters' motivations. But I got to warm up to that. I'm really looking forward to that when I start playing with Brent and Jack. Both of them have never done RPGs before. I think Jack might have when he was a kid. But Brent hasn't even done improv or anything like that. So it's I've got an improv background. Jack's got a stand-up comedy background, and so that's like it's not gonna be too hard for us to make stuff up on the fly. It will be hard for us to make stuff up on the fly that isn't funny. Like that. That's another thing that kind of jumps out a lot is improv. Just because of the awkwardness of it is funny, and it's hard to get away from that if you're trying to have a deep or dramatic moment.
Yeah, you with drama, I've personally found you got to pick your moments. Because my brain very much goes towards the ridiculous axiom. I always joke that my stories tend to jump the shark early, and if they don't, I have no idea what I'm doing with myself. Like, they're not already in space. I didn't blow up the moon yet. What the heck am I doing? But every now and then you find a character that the party just loves for whatever reason, and they end up they just died in the natural course of combat, and you're like, I didn't think they cared about that character, but now they're all really kind of broken up about it. Well, now what are you going to do? You're going to go into that scene a little bit longer. You're going to describe it a little bit more in depth. You're going to let them be in that emotion for a little bit longer. So that's just part of the improv thing is this is stand-up comedy too, is, if you've got a joke that's crushing, whatever energy you're on in that joke at that moment that it's crushing, that everyone's laughing, you stay in that energy. So if you're angry and you have an angry facial expression and everyone's laughing at the bit, you keep the angry facial expression through the bit. Same thing with D&D and RPGs. Yeah. That's a good trait. Let pain sting when you lose a character. NPCs that a party come to love are gems. It's true. If the party just for whatever reason, this could be a AOS. Someone loves their model, right? That you just happen to grab as the random NPC quest giver in the tavern, and they catch the stray arrow. They're for whatever reason, because they have that real attachment to that model. And then suddenly, the character it was representing in the scene, it just gets got. You can use that. You don't have to always use that, by the way. You don't need to just grind your players' emotions into a pulp. But that comes back to expectations and what type of game everybody wants. I posit that you need to have hit a spectrum of emotions. Find like a tone because you want some tonal consistency, but then from there, allow yourself to go out and diverge a little bit and hit some emotional highs and lows and conflict.
It should be okay to be funny.
Yeah. Humor's probably easier when it comes to RPGs, honestly, because you feel a little bit ridiculous, especially early on. Drama's probably a lot harder sell as like a new player, I would think, but that just my brain wiring. So I think we built a pretty solid bridge here from wargame to RPG. Any last thoughts before we kind of move on to? I think I've got you for about another half hour here before we move on to more of the design aspect of like, okay, now you've got players ready to play your game. You've built the bridge. You've brought them over. What are some tips to build a campaign? Any last bridge moments?
No, I don't really. I feel like we beat the tar out of this one. And
we crushed
we have this experience.
We crushed it, and we managed on some GM 101 tangents. So actually, like, okay, you've got your players, you've got your spectrum. You got Brent on board, and Jack. They haven't played in a long time. Now you got to go and build your campaign. Do you? I have to wonder. Are you a GM who builds a campaign for the players, or do you build your story and include your players in it? How do you approach it?
Sorry, I like to have an outline, and that way, when the players are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. I like to have an outline, and when my players add the disruption that they do, I'm able to adjust for it because I know where the story is going and know what's important for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have to also be able to retreat and change something if I find something that's just too juicy to let go. I might have a story that's a murder mystery, for example, but if one of my characters has a chance to reunite with and finally face off against their abusive parent, I might go, okay, we're going to spend 2 sessions on this, and that might be the last 2 we have for the chapter. I think that is going to be more of a payoff for the players, or if I think something will be more of a payoff for the players, I'll divert. So that's my style, anyways. I like to kind of have the hero's journey mapped out. I start with, who the heroes are. That's answered by my players. Their allies or enemies, where we're going, the spaces they'll be in, what concepts they have. I have a list. I have a mood board. I put that together.
You have a mood board?
Yeah, I do. Mood board is something that I discovered in video game development, where somebody said, "Oh, we're going to make a video game," and immediately it is going to be let's just say pull something out of the ether here. We're going to make a zombie survival video game. Okay. So immediately people think all the other zombie survival games. Some person's thinking Left 4 Dead, some person's thinking Last of Us, and the person who gave the idea might be thinking of DayZ.
Or Resident Evil. Come immediately, Resident Evil.
Like Resident Evil. So the idea is that you want to be able to take as many things that are similar to what your initial concept is, and throw some visual and maybe even some audio cues together, or maybe some references to like video or movies to go check out.
Yes.
So I'll put together a mood board that has like pictures and audio and video that people can go check out, and I'll say this is basically what your world is going to look like.
I love this. See, I do similar. I didn't know it had a technical term. I do some similar strategies. When I'm writing a specific NPC, say I'm like writing a villain or a support character or something like that, I'll listen to specific types of music whilst I'm writing them. And I do a lot of like pre-writing that will never be in my games. And sometimes I write, like I have an NPC who's just got like a single sentence blurb underneath their name. Just one phrase. It might be like a Winston Churchill quote or something like that. But then, or it'll be a quote from that character's perspective. Like, I don't see problems, I just see punching bags, right? Like, I know what that character, I know how that character is going to act in every scene from that cue I give myself. But if I'm writing something more in depth, I want to build out a really something richer or deeper. I'll like immerse myself. I'll listen to a bunch of Johnny Cash for this villain, right? Like all I'm listening to right now is Johnny Cash. But like I love what you're saying about like movies. If you're, I think this goes both ways, players and GMs. GM, if you're, one of the big questions I hear from GMs is usually, like, you know, I'm out of inspiration, or how do you get inspiration? Well, you got to fill up on inspiration. Like, I don't know where to go with my story. Well, you got to fill up on inspiration. You
Yeah.
know, like, you got to go out and, like, if you're telling a space western, I'm gonna go watch Firefly. I'm gonna go watch Cowboy Bebop. I'm gonna go watch Outlaw Star, and I'm gonna listen to Johnny Cash, and then I'm gonna like throw in some like gunship in there for the techno aspect. Like, you got to immerse yourself in those things and refill on
Yeah.
inspiration.
True.
But I like the mood board. That's a little bit of a separate point, but I think it's important to immerse yourself in media when you're trying to build a story or a campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I like to do also is I establish it. There's a difference between a narrator and a character that I'm representing as a GM. So I actually I employ hand signals. This is a callback to the old vampire days. But basically, I'm holding a hand up if I'm out of character, or I'll put it up.
You can't see right now. I've got my hand on my head.
Yeah, you're obfuscated.
Yeah, hand on the head. I'm out of the scene.
Yeah, out of the scene. There you go.
Yep. Gosh darn it.
It's hard because there could be three people in the room that you can't actually, physically get up necessarily, or you're on video call, right? Because of the global pandemic right now. So you can't like get up and leave the scene, but your character is eavesdropping, but it's hard for them to ignore you unless you give them some kind of visual indicator that you're not visible to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really good way of doing it. To say like, I'm not visible to you. You obscure your face a little bit. Or I can't talk to you, but I can hear you. Like that's another, like using hand signals, I think is a good, quick way to communicate to your party or to your players what's going on. And the narrator, I think, is especially important. So if you'd indulge me just for a second, I'd like to share a little story here.
Okay.
Okay. I was pulling inspiration from this movie, this Guillermo del Toro movie called Devil's Backbone. And in the story, there's this antagonist and protagonist. And in the story, there's a third character, which is a bomb, a 500-pound bomb that fell in this schoolyard. This movie takes place in an orphanage. And a 500-pound bomb fell and did not detonate. It's just stuck in the ground like a hot water heater. And they say that the soldiers came out and defused it. But children go up to the bomb, but it's too heavy to move. So they like go up to the bomb and they listen, and they swear they can hear it ticking and other stuff, right? They can hear machinations inside. So the bomb became a character that's like this presence through the whole film, and it's just like there and creating this weird, the whole world could blow up any minute tension. And I borrowed that concept and I made a mage game where the characters mentor, their teacher, had been murdered. So it's a murder mystery. But at the same time, it happens to take place during a blizzard where a shipwreck took out the only bridge out of town. So there's this shipwreck, which is interesting, that can be investigated or whatever. But when people get near the ship, the blizzard roars up and people can't really get close. So like not even like the town police officers or firemen can get close because of this weird blizzard that's happening. So it's a kind of like this presence that's in this case it's a really bad version of the bomb where it's a weird thing. There's no threat to the players, but it becomes an identity or part of the story.
Well, I mean, Twister does this actually, or Jaws does this. Like monster movies are great for having like a presence that is a character, even if it's not a speaking presence or even a thoughtful presence, right? Like there's no like Twister. I love Twister because they basically give all the tornadoes like characterizations and archetypes, and like they go into like the whole mythos of like tornadoes. Of like, if you just take the tornadoes out and make them aliens, that's an even sweeter movie.
Yeah,
and it's suddenly an like I know Twister's kind of like a hokey bad movie, but you get inspiration, drawing inspiration from stuff, changing a couple dials, reskinning some things. Never be afraid of that. There's an expression, steal like an artist, or what is it? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Like, there's no shame. I go a step further, and I don't think any knowledge is intrinsically yours. That it's all just borrowed. We're all influenced by media, whether we read the same stories or we looked at the clouds and we know what real clouds look like, and then I just happened to be reading Jaws at that time, and I'm like, well, what if I make Twister, right? Like, I've just borrowed two bits of knowledge that are truly out there. The theft of that, going all in, that's the being confident in it. Be confident in your story. If you're like, I'm just telling you guys Jaws, except instead of a shark, it's a bomb, or instead of a shark, it's a freaking demon, yo. Like, whatever you're taking your inspiration, however you're shifting that stuff, do it confidently. I mean, that's
nobody knows you're making it up. Nobody knows. For all they know, that you wrote everything down and you have a plan.
Yeah. And let them think that. Let them think that. Seriously, let them think that. Let them think you're smarter than what you are when you're building your campaign. You know, some of the best games I've run have just been, they started with a bar fight and I had little more than that, and then from there I was just yes-to-ending my players. And they're just like, that was like one of the best stories you've ever told. I'm like, no, it's one of the best stories you ever told. I just that one got away from me early, but because I read the energy correctly and so on and so forth. But back to this campaign building, mood board, I really like that.
Mood boards, I think, are super important because it helps people get like an instant visual understanding of what you're aiming at. And I like to have music playing at the same time. There's lots of soundboards out there online for you to queue up, RPG music that's appropriate for your setting. I think there's even soundboards that do like synthwave music for people running Shadowrun. It's that deep.
Yeah, Neo. Right? You want to be listening to Neo Tokyo and stuff,
Exactly. But if you don't have that, collect the music into a Spotify playlist and just hop around. So you have it. Music's not going to affect everybody, and certainly not going to affect everybody in the same way. But it is a cheap way of getting a mood across. And what I mean by cheap is it's inexpensive for everybody's time. Yeah. You put on a metal song or some brass music, whatever.
You know what this is about. You know what this scene is. I mean, think about Final Fantasy without Uematsu, right? Like the iconic Final Fantasies without their composer. Like, those games don't hit the same notes. Double entendre there. They don't hit the same, resonance with their viewership or their people who are playing those games. No, I love that. Don't be afraid to use media, and don't be afraid to quote unquote borrow and or steal ideas. Reskin them, make them yours. Your players, they might know, but then you just reward their cleverness. Like, you are a clever player. You figured it out, right? And then from there, this ties into a little bit tangential, but I think it's important that you're taking notes as you're noticing what beats and moods and film that they're picking up on. If they reference something that you haven't seen, maybe go take a look at it.
That's recognizing them and praising them for that stuff is really good too. Mm-hmm. I have young kids, and I have an 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old playing D&D at the same time. We have them play as goblins. So when they say, I want to smash all the windows in the room, they're still in character. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and as goblins, I often have the 11-year-old trying to convince his little brothers who are just lesser goblins, he's trying to convince them of some kind of plan. And oftentimes they just go with the flow, or they agree or whatever, and everything falls apart because they're kids, and that's okay because they're goblins, and that's also okay. But the idea is that at one point my 11-year-old said, I'm just going to stuff all these weapons in a closet and nobody will find them. And I said, don't you think that's a little obvious? And he said, dude, I'm a goblin. I'm like, you're getting extra experience tonight.
There's a Paizo module called Weeby Goblins. That was fantastic. You're playing like CR 1/8 goblins trying to solve like a hero's journey. I don't run modules often, but that one was like, everyone's got to play this module because it's that like it just strikes. I think everyone's got, in a sense, when you're gaming, we all have that like inner like 7 or 10-year-old, right? War gamers, RPG gamers, even video gamers. Like, if you're a gamer in some capacity, there's some direct line between your sensory perception and that inner child, and the things that just get you there or strike that chord, like, you gotta relish and embrace that a little bit. So
it's true. Speaking of embracing the inner child, Do you think that a destruction module is coming up for Soulbound? They got to do that, right? They got to let you play orcs.
I mean, I think there are very few fan bases as adamant as orc players.
Right.
Like I've said, there are two players I give this description to now because I got woke to the other one. I think there are the two most fanatic fan bases in all of Age of Sigmar are orc players and Seraphon players. They're the two most fanatic. And
Seraphon players are the only old hammer people that didn't just quit.
Pretty much. Yeah, and orc players are orc players are orc players. Like, if you were playing World of Warcraft or Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons and you had a half-orc barbarian and you go into any game anywhere, you're like, you know if you want to play orcs or not. You just, like, I don't have to sell you on orcs. you know what orcs. And I find it's one of those, for me it's a little bit of a paradox because orcs are very flavored to their setting. Like orcs in Dragon Age, for instance. Darkspawn or whatever the heck. Like, totally unique idea, these aren't orcs, don't steal. Versus like a Warhammer orc versus a Warcraft orc even. Warcraft orcs almost read like Ronin. You know, like pride, ancient, a little bit of like like masterless samurai, right? Like they have that read. They did a good job
with making it a departure from Tolkien and from Games Workshop when they made their orcs, when they developed them into what they are now.
Right.
I really like that, actually, making them honor bound and obsessed with honor.
Yeah, and they're a disgraced race to an extent because Gul'dan was kind of a son of a bitch.
Right.
And so they right. But yeah, no, they did I think they did a really good job there. But if you played orcs in Warcraft and you're playing Warhammer, chances are you're on board with playing orcs in Warhammer too, right? Yeah. So I think Soulbound orcs or destruction is inevitable. I also do think that their species rules give you a lot of agency to make some of that stuff yourself. Soulbinding is really cool, but they outline in their sort of alternate rule section, like, you don't have to run a Soulbound campaign, which I think is just a good tool to give GMs. I think, okay, yeah, you're a veteran GM, awesome. You know exactly the limits of how much you can freestyle, how much you can homebrew, how much you can change, and how much you can throw out. And by the way, I'm going to give you all a secret right now, GMs. Speaking of campaign design, you can change anything that doesn't work for you or your game or your players. Don't be afraid of that. There's, for some reason, we have this adherence to the letter of the rule. Now, that being said, the point I was trying to make is when you do give the thing rules, to tell them, here's a rule on changing the rule, you empower everybody by having a rule for it. And I think that's very important. So Soulbound's really cool, really good about that. Where you don't have to play a Soulbound game, and here are the species rules for making your own species. So right now you could be running an orc through those rules, but having them down the line is just inevitable, I think.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to all the four alignments to come out. It seems like the next obvious step of evolution. Yeah, this is the DA order book.
Yeah, right? I want to see. I mean, because conceivably you'd maybe go Gur with destruction, and you go Shyish, and you might actually shift around which realm you're in. Because I really want that Planescape vibe where you're just powering through all these different planes. I want to see what it's like to grow up in Nagashazar, because they talk about in the fluff how you're you grow up you live alongside your long dead ancestors in there, and before Nagash sort of started bending all of it to his will, it's almost like every version of the afterlives are there. The heavens and the hells are in Shyish. So growing up next to your ancestral homeland with your great grandparents still around, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, can be kind of utopian. Yeah.
All in the same bed.
yeah, all in the same bed. I
gotta take it. I'm gonna take this one. The rest of you rot.
So I think we're encroaching your hard out on the speed run. So you got to go rapid fire mode on campaign.
No, actually, it's 6:55 my time. I have an hour.
Oh, you have an hour yet? Okay, I'm sorry. I conflated.
We're good. We're good.
Okay, we're good. Whew! I overestimated the speed run here. All right. So yeah, more world building. Kind of coming off some of these tangents, getting back into like other tips for building your GM. You started at the inception, taking notes. Taking notes is very important. You're gonna have your own style of taking notes, so I'm afraid I don't have a tip for you, dear GM, on how to take your own notes. But do you have any, perhaps, or you kind of mentioned you take your own notes and then you nah.
Just have a garbage notebook nearby. It's full of shorthand that if anybody tried to read it, they would think I was a crazy person.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. My journals look like Da Vinci. My GM journals look like Da Vinci's like journals.
it's for me, not for anyone else.
Yep, and that's the thing is I usually start with a 3. You mentioned like having a limit, six adventures or 6 sessions or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I would say write your campaigns with intent. There, you can always play for time later if if you want to, or you can ask people to extend it. But giving yourself a beginning, middle, end is super important. So this naturally aligns with the 3-act structure, which naturally aligns with certain writing techniques. But like just going like beginning, middle, end. It's that simple. And you can always do side quests and world building adventures and player backstory adventures where you revisit the characters like home, and you can always do that stuff. That's the beauty of an RPG. Whereas making a movie that has to be done in an hour 30 minutes doesn't give you a lot of leeway to do a bunch of flashbacks and stuff. Well, in an RPG you can, although I would hazard against flashbacks. Everybody, for various reasons, you kill the player in their flashback, you got a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I do 3-act. I essentially align in like a 3-act structure usually, beginning, middle, end. And then I will put the big story beats that I have for myself. I'll go, I want this to happen at the end of Act 1, so, like, I want a big earthquake to happen at the end of Act 1 that swallows this city. And that's my Act 1 climax, right? Like, city, characters start in, get swallowed. Okay, because this is somehow tying into... Oh, I should go even further back. Every campaign has a premise. This is writing technique stuff. I don't know how this differs for you. Do you go in with like a premise or like a story to tell? Like where do you start with that? What's your inception?
I go in with it. Yeah. I just borrow a trope. I say murder mystery or some other kind of hero journey trope.
So you start with the trope or the genre like trope. Okay, so you're essentially like you're borrowing your premise. Which is,
it's a lot like the Jack Nicholson thing we talked about earlier, where it's an easy way to describe what's going on. Everybody's in love with their Chantry Elder, and then one day, they find her body, but the Chantry isn't disturbed. There's all these like, oh, we have a mystery on our hands now.
Perfect.
It's obvious to the players what the next call to action is and what the refusal of that call is. We talked about that earlier as well. Like what happens if you don't decide to look? Like maybe it's an opportunity for you to turn away from the life. Right.
And it's important if you can identify your call to action. So, like, we talked about the onion one earlier, right? Like, oh, trolls attack. What's the consequence for the player if they don't stop the troll from eating all the onions, right? Thinking about with your call to action. If you... Now, one of two things can happen. You can see an awesome opportunity for an alternate path of campaigning if your call to action has an inverse action that's equally as strong. This also, for me... You can do this with villains. When you're coming up with villain motivations, you want to think about if the villain succeeds, what does that look like, right? Like, and super important for villains is why are they doing it? But more on that a little bit later. So with players, your call to action, you want to. You've said call to action a couple times. Do we need to define it for the stream? Do you think they need to?
Let me just throw one out there for you. So this is a scenario where players they go to a city and they're looking for work, right? And people are like, oh, you look like you might be able to handle this. A Tree Lord Ancient has gone to this forest that's on the other side of this ridge, and he perished there. And we would like you to go and return his soul pod. Go find it and bring it back to us. And so the player's like, cool, straightforward. I understand this is my call to action. If I don't do it, they'll find someone else. No big deal. But if the players decide to get invested in that, and they go and look at this thing, the call to action is actually not this point. This is an illusion of a call to action. This is just what starts you on the path. the call to action when they get there, when they find the body of this Tree Lord Ancient, where the Tree Lord fell, has sprung a clean fountain of water, and it has caused this village to spring up around the body of this ancient, and now all the people there are thriving because they have clean water. So if you remove the body of the ancient, then these people will all perish potentially. Mm-hmm. So that is the call to action. It's okay to have plot point 1, plot point 2, and depending on the characters, the players, if they roll a dark elf, they're not going to care. They'll be like, all right, well, cool, good luck, everybody, and they're going to cut up the body and haul it off where they need to go. But the Stormcast might go, hang on, like, don't, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. So in my brain, I just heard conflict, like just like stories are about conflict. So you've created a conflict. There's a party conflict, and then you also have a story conflict with, do we take this or not? Those are good decisions are ones that have a conflict. It's not really a decision if you just do the thing and you never have to think about it, right? Like there's no conflict there.
Yeah, and in the scenario I talked about earlier about the Bretonnian Knight and the Paladin on foot and the Troggoth, that story is not complicated. It is narrative from a wargaming perspective, but it is like they need to sort out this thing if they want to get off the bridge. So, okay, let's fight. Yeah. It can be that simple, Yeah. It doesn't have to be plots within plots, Dune level things like I described.
Yeah, plots and then subplots and A plots and B plots and C plots. You don't have to go that complicated. Like I said, you'll find that players will add complications on their own. I think I has been my experience as a GM, and you just kind of pick your shots from there, and you'll have these rather robust games. So back to the note. This is in writing. This is essentially like you're coming up with. So you've got the conflict, and then like they're going to resolve the conflict, and that could be a whole campaign arc. Why did this? How big you make that in scope is like how many threads it pulls in or pulls on. So you start with your call to action. When you start with your call to action, do you look at it adventure to adventure? Do you look for like I've got an adventure arc that's going to encompass all my 6 sessions? To go back to your 6 session thing.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I like to do is I have an arc that I'm trying to devise, and if I find the players aren't biting, I'll come up with a couple of those calls and let them pick the one that they find the most interesting. It's easy to connect the dots at the end to wrap it up and say, oh, it's all part of the master plan. And really, it wasn't. You just kind of improvised the whole time. Now I'm leaning on my experience to do something like that. But if somebody wanted to map out a scenario in which a wayward noble is reunited with their parents, that can be your end point that you're driving toward. Anything they do, dungeon crawling, chasing after a villain, finding vengeance, these are all things that player-driven plot points that just kind of come up, and you can always lead them to the end of the story when it's time to wrap it up. Because that was the thing you opened with, and that's the thing you're closing with. All the other stuff that they have, all those other little untied fetters that they're connecting and creating in the session for themselves, that's the candy that keeps them coming back to play more. They want to see more of that character develop. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're just tired of that dude. I've had a couple of players make characters that were just too damn powerful, and nothing was a challenge for them, and as a result, they got bored really quickly. That was a really good learning experience for me, where I wanted everybody to feel awesome, and as a result, they were just like wasting the monsters. But at some point, they didn't want to do it anymore. There was no stakes. There's nothing like the writer refusing that call. Nothing was at stake for them. So that's where I think the term murder hobo is like the most relevant. It's like I'm powerful. Like, what can I kill here? I can't kill anything. Not worth it. At what point is the coin? What is the value of the coin that makes it worth it for me to stop and pick it up?
Well,
like what?
Yeah, like the Wall Street tycoon who can't even be bothered to bend over and pick up $100 bill or their entire wallet if they drop it once you get to a certain level of rich. Like,
Mhm.
That's why a lot of systems, actually, RPGs, have been moving away from currency entirely, because it's sort of like an antiquated vision of character motivations in some senses. Like we've done
Mhm.
coin. Well, what is the limit of coin? You know, around the time I built my third fief, and I'm still not playing the main campaign arc. Like, which is cool if
Yeah.
you want to do the resource management, get gold. You know, set up like your McDonald's in the campaign, but then you need to have character expectations and player expectations that, like, hey, this is what this campaign's going to be. Um,
Yeah. I'm way more tolerant of that stuff if it's as we talked about earlier, a character quirk, right?
mhm, mhm.
If it's wimpy and he's needing cheeseburgers all the time, like he will trade you on Wednesday for something he needs now. Like that's interesting and that's something that should be explored.
Yeah.
But if it's a character who just wants to like be awesome and have all the money in the world, like you can sort that out really quickly, and that probably will get bored.
Cool, cool. Here you go. You have all the money in the world. Now what? Like, you just give it to them.
Yeah,
Like,
now
all right,
what?
cool. Yeah, now what? um, yeah, there's I also like I always call it rounding up versus rounding down. I tend to round up my players as opposed to round down. That's that yes and is another way of saying it, but it also comes to like their power level. Like, I want my characters to be awesome in my games, because then the stuff they deal with can be awesome too. Like, I'm not interested in telling the story about the peasant who almost dies to a single orc. You know, I want the Kingmaker story where they go out and they fight a legion of the goblins, and then that one souped-up Bane orc shows up, and now they're like, oh, crap. Like, that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in. But, you know,
Yeah.
so you've got, like, kind of your premise, your call to action. Where do you go from there?
Um, I like to have. I mentioned the narrator earlier, and the narrator is like a character who I can assume when I'm trying to describe something or explain something. In addition to the narrator, I like to have some kind of mentor, like some kind of Obi-Wan, right? Like
Well,
you
this is
want
a
to have somebody who.
monomyth. This is a
What's that?
monomyth. This is a monomyth tenet. This is a hero's journey tenet, is like having the mentor character.
Yeah. Like I like to have somebody there who's going to just discount the exposition effort that I have to spend. You know, somebody there is going to look at it like, actually, the disease you have is quite rare. You know, like
I love you went to the Deckard Cain. Like, oh, what a rare treasure you have there in that Herodric cube. Like, you gotta freaking
you got me.
yeah,
You got me.
nice. Stay a while, listen.
Yeah. You're gonna meet the mentor, and the mentor can be sometimes. I mean, you can be as interesting with that as you want. You can make the mentor a monster. You can make and go the Del Toro route where the monsters aren't monsters. The monsters actually.
The people are the monsters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the call to action is the mentor, right? The journey will be the lesson you learn.
Mhm.
And it's abstraction for you to think about as a GM as you're setting up a story arc to go, okay, this is going to be really hard for this person who lives in a shire and has never worn a shoe in their life, and they're going to go walk on volcanic rock and throw a ring into a volcano. That's like, you know, it's going to change them, and sometimes the journey might be the mentor. It's just a chance for you to like kind of go, okay, in this arc, who's going to be teaching my players the exposition of what's going on, because they're not always going to have a narrator to describe what's happening, and they're not always going to have insight to what happened behind the scenes with a couple of characters they're not watching right now.
Mhm.
So I like having a mentor or some kind of third party who can just do an info vomit and
Yeah,
move
cut,
the story
cut through the ex. Yeah, I mean they're the expository character. They're one of the Wayans brothers. Like, oh man, if you kill the
Right.
dragon, you can go get the teardrop and save the plague. You gotta have like a yeah.
Is that a D&D movie reference?
What's that?
Was that a reference to the D&D movie?
No, because they never made a D&D movie. Because if they did, it would have been the best thing ever.
Ugh. What movie is that a reference from?
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean
movie,
basically,
right?
yeah, it's the D&D movie.
Okay.
Yeah, come on, no, so there's two things. Like, I deny the existence of Mass Effect 3 and the D&D movie. I haven't,
Oh,
like,
but this is the ending for you. Doesn't that make you feel better?
for what? The Mass Effect? Okay, so now, chat gang, you got to drink because we have another Mass Effect rant. The beginning of Mass Effect 3 sucks. The Shepard sitting doing nothing for 6 months while the Reapers close in is so implausible. I couldn't even begin to get into the game. Like that, and then they went with this like Deus Ex Machina prep from the beginning with a hallucinated kid. Like, I'm just like, I see what you're doing and I don't respect it. Now, if it was Jensen, I think his name was the first character to die under Commander Shepard's like command that we see on camera, instead of some kid out of nowhere, I think you could have had like this. So he's haunted by the ghosts of all the decisions he's had to make. That could have been a compelling narrative element. Instead, it was like, why is this stupid kid here out of nowhere? Oh, to explain the ending at the end. Like, I'm like, I see what you're doing, and I don't like it. I was just like, like, you wrote yourself into a corner, and you needed a DMPC to explain everything to me. Like, no, I have different thresholds for like how much. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so. The D&D movie, man, I can't wait for them to make that movie, and they're going to bring me on as the writer, and it's going to be the best movie ever.
It's going to be epic.
And I'm still going to cast one of the Wayans brothers. It's just going to be Damon Wayans as like the old like wizard. It's going to be sweet. No, like imagine like Major Payne, except he's a wizard. Come on. All right.
You got me.
Yeah.
No, you got me.
There's no shame in using expository characters especially in an RPG. The point is to be actively playing the game, and playing a role is part of playing the game. Rolling dice is part of playing the game. You don't want to be describing. You don't want to LOTR and describe the characters walking along and every rock and kill and all that stuff. You want the characters to actually be playing. You don't want to just be describing everything. And then a DMPC or a expository character is really handy in an RPG because the players get to interact with it. They get to ask it questions. They get to roll dice against it if they want to try to bribe it or whatever. Like, or if they want to use diplomacy or persuasion, or they say this expository character says something, and your character's like, "Oh, my backstory says I'm from that place." Like, and then you're like, "Oh, roll dice. Maybe you know something about that place." Like, giving them, you're giving your players avenues to interact with your shared experience, your shared story. That's why expository characters are good in D&D, and they tend to be lazy in regular narrative, because regular narrative tends to follow the show don't tell, and you're vomiting telling on people with an expositional character.
Right.
And everything is forgiven if the character's interesting, so make your things interesting.
Sure.
So yeah, you've got the character, the mentor. Where do you go from there? Is that it? Like, you boom, got it.
No, I think it's important for a character to go across a boundary of some kind where they've hit the investment, kind of the emotional investment of the story. So. A good example of that is Frodo leaving, or
Star Wars has it too. He goes to the cantina.
Yeah,
Sword of what is it? The Wizard's Rule, the Sword of Truth series has it, where he literally crosses a barrier into the other world. Narnia's got it. Like, they all have some metaphoric or physical barrier they cross. Yeah.
Exactly, something they can't return from, and it's Tyrion, facing his father with a crossbow, right? This is the moment. Like, this is it. This is like the pre-climax, like, super nail-biting moment. Mm-hmm. That basically says, okay, you know what the call to action is, you know what the refusal means. If you want to refuse it, you have this person encouraging the party. Now it's time to jump out of the airplane and go fight in the war zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
So that's usually like the boundary, and then you meet the people that you find along the way. Like, in Labyrinth, the character, she meets a whole bunch of Sarah meets like this rock guy who can control rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Did I die? Did I drop my computer?
No, you're still there. You're still there. Like, your video's frozen, but I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I look awesome.
Yeah.
So like, she has this character that can control rocks, or she's got these little allies or enemies or whatever. She's
the one who pees on fairies, like that one. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, the guy who poops on fairies.
Yeah.
You have the in Luke's case, I don't know if I died.
No, you're still here. No, you're still here. I'll try to refer this. I might maybe refresh.
Okay. Like Discord just like went black on me entirely. Like
Yeah. Okay.
it's crashing.
Yeah.
It's gonna restart.
All right.
I like.
What if we force the restart real quick? Real quick, chat gang. What's your favorite Labyrinth character? Obviously, mine's the Goblin King. David Bowie in that movie is in many ways directly responsible for who I am to this day. What's cool about I know who else could it be? The Goblin King. Come on. But I don't know if he's going to get to this point, so I'll let him. Oh, he's back. All right, we'll see. Are you back? Hey, he's back. All right, cool. So the characters they meet along the way. I was going to bring up a point about Bowie, but I will save it.
Oh, well, let me just like tear through the rest of the list. The characters they meet along the way can also be their mentor. It can be the Yoda. It can be the trial that they're doing is they're training to be the Jedi, running around Dagobah, getting awesome. And
did you just reference KOTOR as well?
What's that?
Did you just reference KOTOR as well, right? Like where they're because you actually run around and you assemble your lightsaber and everything. You go through the whole bit.
I was less of a KOTOR person and more of a SWTOR person. And I know that makes people hate me immediately, but...
No, that's fine. You can't... Longevity of an interest doesn't equal worthiness of an interest. Get that out of... I don't like that.
Yeah, I really liked what they did with SWTOR, the Star Wars, the
MMO. Yeah,
the MMO.
Yeah, the MMO was pretty solid. The Jedi storyline was actually was real writing. I think that was the Drew Karpyshyn storyline, right?
Yeah.
That was, I mean, I'm like, we've got real big boy writing here, not just like video game writing. So
well, the Trooper story also, I don't know if you played it, but it has some really good like moral decisions to make.
Yeah.
And these are soldier choices. Like this is good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Cool.
Right out of the movies from World War II that,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what you want. I mean, we might continue with the characters meet along the way, but like decisions along the way is super important. You want those interactions and those decision points. Continue.
Yep. So next, I think players have to have like a sense of okay, I'm ready. My pencils are sharp, and I'm going to get in there. And they got to start their ordeal. They're going to get into the point where they're going to go and, drive up to the villain's skyscraper and start to scale the outside, or they're going to, go into the cave, or they're going to, kick in the door. One way or the other, they're going to go face their ordeal.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's usually some kind of payoff, and then the road ahead.
Yeah,
and that's really it. It's like right out of the playbook, man. You can like go look this list up.
Yeah, the
hero journey.
Yeah, the hero's journey, also known as the monomyth. It's not the only plot archetype. There's about seven in all of literature. I know. If you really want to forever be ruined from enjoying fiction ever again, you major in English Lit, and one of the first courses you'll get when you get to about the 200 level is something that tells you that there are only 7 stories that have ever been told since the history of mankind, and but that comes back to like knowing what cinema's got 3 plots. Thank you.
Yeah. What is it? Property and people and and ego, right? I think those are the 3.
Yeah, it's like film's got like 3, and you've got the experimental one or concept, right? Where like plot doesn't exist, and it's just about like, can I do this? And then in each scene going, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? That's the that's Empire, right? Like the Andy Warhol, like, is this even cinema? And he just shoots the Empire State Building. But there's
it's closer to like Lit or The Cube.
Yeah, where they're just like going scene to scene, and they're just like there's there's that I think it's not a Lynch movie. There's oh my god, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's Mind something. Oh my, I could see the
Enemy
cover.
Mine?
No, Enemy Mine's great, but no, I can see the cover of it. It's got like a multicolored character's face, and then like gushing from the side of his head is all these almost like shattered glass panes, I can't remember the name of it. Oh my gosh. But that's like
It
just
sounds like Borderlands.
yeah, it's just like a pure experiment, like experimental. So yeah, you've got like you've got like experimental or concept. Some people hate concept plots. I actually find concept plots work really well in RPGs. So concept
They
plot
do.
is like just going, can I do this or does this work? And you can do that adventure to adventure. You can do that act to act. Like it's when you talked about this nice little structure for your campaign. You just take that and you zoom it in. You go an adventure is that, and then you continue to zoom that out. And so at each, depending on how complex you want to make it, you can have the call to action to get onto the main plot, like getting through that village. This is where you talked about like going and looking at that acorn or whatever, or the soul seed, right? Like the first adventure, the call to action is to get you to go there. So that's adventure 1, right? And then adventure 2, you stumble upon the bigger layer, and you just go through this over and over and over again. And again, there's different narrative plot types and stuff like that, but there's a reason monomyth is the most common. It very naturally aligns to, in particular, an adventure game, which is what Soulbound is. I mean, this is an adventuring game. My plot structure is going to look a little bit different for VTM. That's a lot more exploratory concept. I talked, yeah. I mean, I talked about how like I start with a premise usually. A premise being, Heretics was here talking about like single words. Well, that's kind of you're getting in the right vein, but you want your premise to do something or say something. So you want an active premise. You don't want.
I love that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
You
Go
bring
ahead.
up BTM in casual, and I just love that the storyteller games where BTM is about predation. It's about I own people or I own control, right? And then there's like Wraith, which is about wrapping up loose connections and loose ends and finishing an unfinished story, or the impossibility of finishing an unfinished story.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I love how they take those and they just really paint them in super broad terms. Like, there's no way to get away from this now. This is just the world you're in.
Yeah.
Soulbound luckily has ghosts and vampires in it. So
yeah. You can play with those dials and go where you want to go. You can change it if you want to. To take from Monica from Bonus Experience podcast she was on a few episodes ago. But yeah, so you've got this sort of structure down. Well, now you need to build details. Do you have any strategies for building your details? Do you draw from the players? Do we go back to our movies? Like, how do you layer that stuff in?
Again, I kind of go off of a, what I want to achieve communicating for the storyline for each session. Mm-hmm. So I talked about a mage game a while ago that it's literally a campaign. I could run it again and again and again, but in each session they're going to do something new. Like the first session is we didn't talk about this we talked about a little bit with session 0, but we didn't talk about one-to-one role playing. I like to do this with my players when they're coming up with their character concept. I will just have a role-playing session with just them, where they're the focus of the whole thing, and I will provide them scenarios and situations and help them kind of suss out what their character is. Mm-hmm. So we usually start with like an origin story of some kind. And then the next part of it is that origin story leads them to this teacher, and that teacher is going to be how the characters are linked. They all had this life-changing experience where they were taught how to bend reality with their mind, and it doesn't matter how wild the concepts of these characters were to begin with. One of them was a single mom who was a nurse, and another one was the sheriff's deputy, and another one was a custodian who had a terrible stutter, and they all have this like rich atmospheric life to them, but they're all linked through this teacher.
Soulbound does this naturally too. I mean, Soulbound, someone would have performed the binding, right? So you're going to have a natural anchor in that respect. Continue.
And I think that's like really just there to say it's there as a crutch, but like it's a cool way and say this is go find other Soulbound, fight them.
Yeah. I like it because I think this is one of those things that makes Soulbound a really good bridge game to build that bridge from wargaming to RPGs. And like now you've played Soulbound for a little bit, you get comfortable with RPGs, and now you go out and you want to play VTM and stuff like that. But it codifies some of these things that more experienced GMs probably know or use already, whether they know they're intentionally. You know, storytelling is one of just the purest, oldest art forms that we have. You know, there's even, you know, some of the cave drawings where like we think that they're these prolific historical things, and it's just like it turns out that they're just like jokes and wisecracks. Or some of the oldest cave drawings is just like jokes shared between tribes and stuff. Storytelling is pretty ancient. Humans have essentially coded in their DNA stories and how to tell them, and even if you're not like hip to the lingo of monomyth and, you know, premise and subtext and all these things that we use, like you know this stuff. You've consumed stories your whole life. You've read stories. You've watched movies. You've listened to songs. That have, you know, you've heard Stairway to Heaven. Like you've been told, you've been consuming stories this whole time. You've played a great video game, and whether you're intentionally doing it or not, you're using this stuff. And what I like about Soulbound is it does kind of codify that stuff into the rules so that it goes from being subtextual to textual. I like that it does that.
Sure.
So,
did you read the player guide that Cubicle 7 put up on their site?
Not yet.
They give us a list. It's a little close to what we're already talking about. Okay. I wrote it down. It's short. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to
go ahead.
read it off.
No, by all means.
This is a player's guide. So it's like guide for other players, not necessarily. We've been totally GM focused for this conversation, but players need advice too. And we can't always presume that the players are going to be super experienced. Just because, like I mentioned earlier, I run sessions with little kids in it. I just got to make it okay for them to break all the windows in the room, I guess. So the player guide I thought was really good. They said step 1 is to create a compelling character, something you want to be, something that is either a shinier version of you, or something that you aspire to, or something that you admire, or even if it's like, it doesn't have to be a great thing that you're admiring. It could be something like, I want to be a badass, like Boba Fett. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I want to be Wolverine. I'm just going to make Wolverine in Soulbound.
Yep.
Like, I'm
Wolverine. There we go.
Yeah.
He's got the chops, the hair, all.
Yeah. You can do this.
You can. The second step, which I've said, I really love these words they chose for this, which is interrogate the fiction. And what I think that means is when they say, the GM says you walk into the village, and they say a chicken clucks as the gates open, and that's it. Like, you can say, what are the guards wearing? You know, you mentioned earlier the annoying guy who's like, what is the history of this village? Well, you're going to have to go find a book first, and then you can read. We'll talk about it then. So then the questions become, where would I find a book? You know?
Yeah.
That's interrogating the fiction. Then the next step is to be a fan of each other. And I think this is critical.
Yes.
When players are... this is another thing I think Soulbound achieves. So the act of soul binding, a Soulbound group, you are bound together. You're inextricably linked. You have to have a reason to be connected, one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And whether it's by hook or by crook. And I think it's okay to have, you know, a conflict there, but you should be like when your buddy is, or when another fellow player is like really in character and they're really nailing it, you got to be thinking to yourself like, yeah, you did it. Yes. Yeah. Like you were such a pirate right now, or you were
wait a pirate. Yeah.
A Stormcast right now.
Yeah. Well, this works for the GM too. GM, be a fan of your players. Like,
yeah.
Like, be a fan of your players.
It's huge.
Yep.
And then the next part is leave room for your character to grow, which is, I think, an interesting challenge. So I at one point made a character who was retired. He had been a paladin in his youth, and he became a fisherman, and he had been a fisherman for 20 years. And then suddenly his church is calling him back to arms. So he goes and he gets his armor out, and it doesn't fit him, and he's wearing what he can, and his sword is rusty, and you know, that character doesn't have a lot of room to grow because he's already theoretically past his prime. But another way of looking at it is like, okay, is he changing his discipline? Is he looking into the future in a way where if he overcomes his quest, is he going to wrap up some loose end here? the story doesn't have to be about that character. So by saying giving your character room to grow, it doesn't have to be literally the character is going to grow. It can be the character is going to advance the story.
It can be, you know, I mean, what's cool with that is this, you have this, you know, retired paladin. This is where, like, having a quirk, like, that's left over. Like, he did take the arrow to the knee and he retired type thing. Like, you can, yeah, you now have that character have to sort of reimagine itself in this palpable feature that you've given that character that's going to make you have to go back to that and change something, and, you know.
Right, like, for sure.
All right. How's it going?
And then there's two more, which is one is build connections with other characters, which I think is just done through the soul binding process. And the last part is to share the damn spotlight, which is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I can be a bit of I am a big personality. I don't know if you've caught on to this yet, chat gang.
I haven't noticed.
Yeah, haven't. No, I'm a little bit of a big personality, so I have to. Use D&D terms. I tend to have to, like, avoid charisma characters if I'm in a group of, like, newer players, because, like, I cannot play the face guy and let new player, because I'm gonna, like, ham it up. I'm gonna be over the top. That's why, like, I'll sink it to a comic relief role, or you know.
Describe for people who haven't played RPGs. Describe what the face guy is.
The face guy would be the character who, like, you essentially accepts the quests. You know, this is the character that's got a lot of the social skills, the persuasions, the bluff, the intimidates. They've got the charm. The face guy is the quote unquote face of the party. Usually, they are the face of the party. They're usually, this is not to be conflated with a wrestling term, because I know some of you know that I wrestled once upon a time. The face guy would be essentially the face of the party. And you also have the librarian. You have the what's the other one? Librarian.
The dog?
Huh? What's that?
Chewbacca, the dog.
Yeah. And then you've got the combat monkey. Like, so you've got these, like, roles that, like, there's some brilliant sort of, like, meta knowledge of the nature of players and character archetypes. Like, you are playing a class, but players themselves also essentially begin to break down into certain roles and stuff like that. And there are some very, very nerdy studies about this stuff that I won't bog this episode down with. But yeah, face guy is you're the face of the party. And so, like, you know, there's you know, so, I mean, just an anecdotal here. You know, I have a character who I've gamed with off and on since college. You know, forever. This is 16 plus years. I've got a couple people I game with that I've gamed with longer than that, believe it or not. But he's not a charismatic individual. He's not like the nerd trope, like he's awkward, but he's just like, he's no big personality. Very much like a nice guy, kind of quiet. You know, he tends not to play face guys, but on that occasion where he plays the face guy, giving him some spotlight to shine has really enriched games. When you have that player, you know, this is the dichotomy between what I call role playing and role playing. That's ROLL playing and ROLE playing. You can use role playing ROLL to supplement. So, like, I am not a genius. Like, I am not Dr. House MD levels of intellect, but I want to play Dr. House MD. This is where my GM can go, oh, dude, yeah, like, you've got an int 20, or you've got, you know, you've got Arcana, you've got knowledge in this. Oh, just roll the dice, man. Oh, yeah, you totally know all this. You know, like, this is an opportunity where the dice can actually supplement the role play, and you find when you encourage players in that way, especially with, like, the guy who wants to play the face guy, like, let them persuade the bartender to give them the drinks for free. What's it matter? You know, like,
that's right. Yeah.
Like, do stuff like that where, like, they get to feel like that face guy, because what you find happening, it becomes cyclical. And you know, that, like, okay, I'm not like the genius, but suddenly, like, that character starts thinking the player starts thinking super tactically, because you've kept rewarding the character in the scenes with their intellect. And it's it's very important to, like, remember this sort of stuff, I think, as players and as GMs, that you can use there's a snobbery that's come with RPGing now that it's become pop culture, where like we have this old guard of RPG gamers, and I don't particularly care for it, where it's like you can't ever roll dice or you're a bad role player because you're using no, the dice. There's a reason it's a game. Like I am not, you know, a physical beast, but my character is. You know, that's a lot easier to see on the dice, right? Because I have the big strength that does the big damage. You can do equivalents of that in your narrative and in your stories and in your problem solvings and your social situations. It's okay to do that too. Sorry, tangent. RantCast. RantCast.
You're good, man. You're good. I've done it a couple times on this call already, so
yeah.
I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, no. This is what it's about. This is why we do this thing. I like this player's guide. The real resonant one for me is be a fan of the other players or be a fan. You can, I mean, think of, I mean, this is going to help reinforce that cooperative experience. And that's really what it is. You can still, if you're a fan of somebody, it's a lot easier even to RP conflict because you're like, I know my character's opposed to you, like in this scene. You know, you want to take the plant pod back to the initial quest giver, and I want to defend the water pool, right? Like, and I'm playing the dark elf, and you're playing the stormcast, right? So you want to take it, you want to defend it, and I want to take it back. Our characters have conflict, right? Characters have conflict, but as the players, I'm just like, oh, you just said this line that was so damn heroic. I like, and like, so like I am now. You get this like. This tertiary layer of conflict now because like I want to play my character a certain way, but the player is just like cheering and high-fiving the buddy sitting next to me who's just like crushing their RP. And so now like I'm conflicted with my own character, and then you're gonna like really you get to go. This almost reminds me of that imagination box because like now you're gonna have to start going deeper on your like what you say back or your line of decision making to like, you know, to get into that scene deeper, to like really play your character and really kind of come to a conflict resolution, right? Like you're gonna for the game to progress, so you have to solve that conflict in that moment and then move forward. I personally think you need a balance of dice rolling and role playing. I 100% agree. I hate the players who think they are able to do something just because they can roll dice. I mean that it's fair, but again, it's really important to remember that like it's you know like there's a reason it's not just straight up improv on a stage where like we're really actually fencing each other and like wearing armor and stuff like you know there is a bit of like, you know, limits to like your natural human condition. That's why you escape into an RPG, I feel, or rather that's why I do anyway. So I think it's important. You know, the dice are there to help and supplement, and if you view it as like as you know the Gary Gygax rule 0, like it is not the rules that are like paramount to the game. It's essentially the other way around, right? Where like it is the story and the interaction that is the best is the most important part. You know, dice are rules. You know, you use them to help you. You use them to form a common ground between all the players at the table. You know, that's what rules do. That's what dice do. They give us a common lexicon to draw from when we want to do anything and everything we could possibly do with our imaginations. You know, my imagination is quite grandiose and over the top. You know, like another player might be more hard-boiled Game of Thrones, straightforward, right? Like I'm out there playing Dragonlance and they're playing Game of Thrones, and we need some fulcrum of balance to interact in that world, and that's where the dice and that's where the game mechanics come in. So
you know, it's interesting that that was the comment was brought up in chat. The idea that a player can just roll a dice and get through something. Mm-hmm. I guess my challenge to that is
make them describe it.
There's that, but also like that player's challenging you for control of what's going on in the scene. And so if you say, like, this door is impenetrable, and they're like, I'll be the judge of that, and they get their dice out, that's okay. Like, what are you afraid of here? Are you afraid of them getting the door open? Are you afraid of them feeling successful? And are you afraid of them, like, getting the person on the other side out or get in. So that I'd love to see some to like kind of hear your advice for somebody who's worried about somebody who's just crunching numbers to get through the tough stuff.
I mean that's where you got to go to like player versus character motivation. Like, you know, what does the player want right now? You know, like what does the character want? Are they at odds, or like you said, are they wrestling you for control of the scene? My advice is really to just get them to describe it too. You know, like if you have like my friend who, you know, he is not the silver-tongued true face of our actual group in reality. But, you know, when he played a face in our most recent campaign, it was some of the most rewarding gameplay we've ever had by just helping him come out of that shell, rolling the dice at first, but then like, okay, so he rolls it, oh, dude, you natural 20 that. Well, what do you say, though? Like, oh, man, this has got to be an epic speech. And, like, he's like, well, I really want to convey this. And you're like, oh, so you say, like, something like, yeah. Then I say, you coax them out of, you know, if they're solving the problem with their intellect, then you, like, oh, they're playing chess. Well, I don't know all the lingo of the chess personally, you know, E to there, like pawn to E5. Like, I don't know all that stuff. Like,
yeah,
like I'm rolling the dice. I'm like, oh, dude, yeah, you play this awesome move, and then like maybe you even go into like describing it like it's like Obi-Wan versus Anakin. Like you go into like you've got, you know, you've lured him into that scene. You can, whatever it takes to get across the emotional thread that they're trying to convey with those dice, I think is what you do.
That was perfect, actually. The way you tied that in there. We do have some clarification in the chat. They're saying that they hate when a player says they have a deception, they want to lie, but they just roll the dice and then they don't have to say what the lie is. Not everybody's going to be awesome at that. That's kind of like as you know, you mentioned there, Meph, the idea that somebody could be House MD in character, but not actually be House MD.
Right.
So I think if you as the storyteller or the GM are a fan of that character being successful, and you're like, they've nailed it with a 20, and that person is maybe struggling to come up with a fiction that suits what they just did in the dice, then that's an opportunity for you to like just take it to the next level. You know, talk about how they, you know, brought up their past as a you know, being raised on a slave ship, and then they've roused the crowd into some kind of a war cry into, you know, storming the castle, and you did it just by doing this epic speech by standing on a table in a tavern and talking about how you had it hard when you were a kid. Yeah. You know, that kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be super long. Everybody gets the idea, right?
Yeah, I think that is a really good distinction. For a door or a road, you don't want your player to take, because without a doubt the players will take it. It's true. Like I love when my players go off script, because I like that feeling as a GM. This is one of the reasons why I personally love GMing, is I love that moment where I have to solve a puzzle suddenly. You know, like where like my players have done something I didn't expect for the narrative and all this stuff, and so like now I've got like all these like puzzle pieces of getting the best scene, the best story across at that moment, and I'm like, okay, they've just gone off script.
Yeah.
All right, like what do we do? And like, and there's a pure joy in that for me, which is why I love being surprised. I used to run this one module at Gen Con of my own for Riffs. It was a train heist, literally on tracks, because when I first wrote it, I thought about like I thought about like, okay, I've got a time limit I got to run this in. I'm going to have like multiple people come through, so I've got pre-gen characters like just wadded up at the center of the table, spare copies in my backpack just in case someone crumples it or accidentally takes it with them. I just remember like not knowing what to expect, so I'm like, I'm going to run the most basic adventure I can, train heist. And like some of the people in the room want to heist the train, and some of the people in the room want to like protect the train from getting heisted. Right, and you have these pre-gen characters, and like, so I ran, like I said, a really basic adventure that I could get across in about like 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours. I can't even remember my original time slot. Never, ever had the same outcome, ever.
That's
on
awesome.
The most structured, basic plot I could come up with. I had one where they crashed the train, and the elemental powering the train got loose and pillaged and like terrorized a village, and then like the bandits and the like good guys like teamed up to go stop this fire elemental that got out. I had this like I had the train heist become a whodunit out of nowhere, where like someone just assassinates the barkeep and now it's a whodunit on who killed the barkeep, and the whole heist plot just like went like out the window. I remember running that game over and over and over again, and like always being surprised by my players, and it's strangers in that case. And this goes back to the yes anding thing, where you're just like, okay, I see where you're going with this, like, and then just trying to like, okay, like let's go here. It becomes difficult balancing all the players' agendas, right? Because every player wants something else out of the scene, and that's where you just got to, like you were talking about really, really early on, is you really got to give each player their attention and their moments to shine. Maybe they can't all shine in the same adventure, but like if one character really takes over an adventure for whatever reason, the dice aren't going the way of like the other players, right? Like you have dice aren't with you in the combat, so you're whiffing on every fight, and your friend next to you can't stop rolling nat 20s. Like I've had sessions like that where they're just crush it. Well, the next time the next adventure rolls around, try to you move that focus, you move that camera around a little bit, you focus on the other players. Or try to give them problems that can't be solved with dice.
You were delighted by that stuff as a GM. I am kind of terrified by that stuff.
Really?
So that's part of the reason why I'm so prepared, why I have put so much effort into the plot points, is because somebody throws me a good curveball, I'm just screwed. My brother, on the other hand, I have to give him some credit here. He runs a game shop, and he has pickup games of D&D on Wednesday nights where just dudes off the street roll in and like, what you doing? And he's like, we're playing D&D. Sit down. And then they do. And I got to tell somebody who's never played before what's going on. And so just to share a quick story with this is how quick my brother is. This dude comes in who's never played D&D before, and he's a bit of a butthead. As I can't really describe him in any better way. He's like kind of a, oh yeah, well I'm going to do this kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
And so he's playing a dwarf, and I think his name is Broseph or something like that. And the dwarf, like they get to the city. The party is like it has a handful of players that play every week, and there's this dwarf, who's this pickup guy, and they're just kind of tolerating him being there. He's a fighter. He's kind of an idiot character. They get to the city. My brother describes opening the gates and the marble walls, and it's this high nobility elfin city with tons of really fancy stuff everywhere, and these royal guards standing proud that they're like the British guards that don't react when you're standing in front of them. And next thing you know, Broseph is like, yeah, I take off all my clothes and I jump in the fountain. And my brother said, why would you do that? He said, well, I'm filthy, man. I need a bath. This is the cleanest water we've seen in the whole session. And so that's true, and it's totally in character, and my brother rolls with it. And so the guards are like, get out of the fountain. They get over close. They're trying to wrestle this naked dwarf who now has soap on him out of the fountain. And the dwarf's like, I am more dangerous when I'm nude. It's like pugulating these elven guards, and they're getting pissed off, right? So they're slipping around and trying to get him out peacefully, but then at some point the dwarf like loses control, and he plows into the sculpture in the middle of the fountain and destroys it, just like smashes it to bits. And so now the guards are like, swords come out, right? He has desiccated this he has not dried out the fountain. He's desecrated this fountain, and the guards are pissed. And suddenly there was an artifact revealed inside the statue. And some kind of noble person was coming by and said, oh, you found it, and you come with me. There was rumors that this was in the city, but we never found it when we moved in. And so next thing you know, this dwarf is responsible for taking this artifact to the High Council. And my brother took this dude off the street who wanted to be the life of the party, made him the life of the party, and then the
moved it into,
person, the player, was now manipulated into, oh, well, I'm responsible for this. I got to make sure the High Council gets this thing.
Yeah.
And it was this amazing, like, I have no idea how my brother did this. It's just like, just from, 30 plus years of DMing, he had this experience. He was able to draw on this stuff.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me of this brilliant moment my son's preschool teacher had, where there was this bully in the class. These kids are all, preschools. They're very little kids. But he was just a jerk. And whenever somebody had a book, he'd go up to them and he'd swat the book out of their hand and he'd take it away from them and they'd cry. And it was about this control. And so she made him in charge of the books. She's like, you now have to go and make sure everyone who wants a book gets the book they want. And just that little flip of the switch, suddenly he became acutely interested in making sure everyone in the room had the book they wanted. And because he's in charge of the books, he had to put them all back when they were done. So, like, she took this kid who was a bad actor and turned him into something that was that was literally driving the story forward. And my brother did the same thing for his little D&D pickup group. I don't know. For people to do what I'm saying, long story, for people to do what you're into, to take those curveballs, I admire that deeply. I am not able to do those things.
Well, I talked about earlier on, as you set yourself up to be able to improv like that. Draw an experience. I've GM'd, I think, about 26 years now. And for those of you keeping track of my age, that means I've been a GM since I was about 9 years old. So my 9-year-old games were very different. They were standing in the backyard, because I played D&D like one time, right? When I was like 9 years old, my friend's older brother, he's a cool middle schooler, right? And he ran us in a D&D game. And then we went outside. I was reading Dragonlance, I believe, around that time anyway. So we went outside, and then like I replicated what we did with D&D with his brother outside, and then I just had like the one die and like whether it would work or not, and we go through that, and that's how I kind of started. And then by the time I got to middle school, I was like enamored with role-playing games, and I found Rifts and TMNT and like all the things that I was already into. And so like
I knew we were going to mention TMNT at some point.
Oh, I love TMNT. It's so good. It's really flawed, but like it's now after the bomb, because the TMT license eventually expired from Palladium, and so now it's after the bomb as the system, and it's not. Essentially, a mutagen bomb goes off, and the whole world becomes like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's awesome. Come on, it's awesome. It's so good.
It's awesome.
There's also a Euro game that's got a very, very similar premise. I'm blanking. Road to Eden or something like that. Pretty cool. They made a strategy sort of
video game, right?
XCOM style game out of the Euro RPG. It's pretty great. Yeah. So but like so that's where I started, and in 6th grade then I wrote a lot of adventures like module style, with specific blocks of dialogue that you would meet an NPC, and like I would want you like to say stuff so that they would have to read, like if they ask about this, then I read this paragraph, and then like I had like read pick your own adventure novels that I was basically writing for every adventure. And then I hit high school, where I began to move away from my core group of like younger friends that had been on this journey the whole way up with me, to where like now I have to start like in conscripting a gaming group, right? So like I went to 6 different high schools. Everywhere I went to, I had to conscript a new group of gamers. So I had to like build a gaming group everywhere I went. With one exception being Green Bay, which had Rogue Traders, and that was the vampire store, and all vampire, all White Wolf, all the time. And that's where I really kind of came out of my shell a little bit. Like, I went on this, like, sojourn of GMing. And high school is where, like, I took my, like, pick-your-own-adventure novel-style modules and threw it out the damn window. Because the group I GM'd when I was about 9th and 10th grade, I could not ever get them to say the stuff or explore the stuff. I could never get them to do anything. So, like, I started to have to improv a lot more, and I started to get preparation fatigue, because they always wanted to play like new characters and stuff, and I'm like, I can't even keep a consistent like character arc. I don't know what to do and so I had that moment of just like kind of throwing my own rules of GMing out the window, and I had to kind of rebuild myself. So by the
Yeah.
time I hit college, I had both the over-prepared guy and this, like, my campaign will never go where it wants to go. It was like Fusion Ha. They came together in college. So, like, the end product is this. I write down a blurb of, like, a single quotation mark sentence for a character. This is something I want them to tell. If I need, like, a full speech, like, I know you're going to walk into town and someone's giving, like, a whole speech, I'll write the whole speech. But, like, I had almost an entire speech ready to improv with several bullet points for the Soulbound game I ran last week, when they were in the sort of, like, congregation room at the end. And Chuck Moore immediately, like, cuts off my, like, guy, and I'm just like, cross off all my notes. We're in RP mode. I enjoy that, but you got to prepare to be unprepared. Like, and that's really where reading in energy of your players, you know, kind of like rolling with the punches, yes-anding them, rounding up, rewarding clever ideas, rewarding clever plans, giving them ways to get in. But you still want that moment where the players, like, find that detail that you hid in your notebook. You know, you still, because that is those deeper things. And so, like, all of that, I don't know, it's, you know, I don't plan as in-depth as I used to. It's maps, encounters, and beats. That's every adventure for me. It's maps, encounters, and beats, and then I look forward to when I have to go off script. The biggest plot point in my last campaign, there were a couple, but I gave the party the MacGuffin at the very beginning of the campaign. This is the Manus Mortis, it can kill gods. They didn't believe me, so we got to, like, this ended up being like an Act 4 and Act 5 like arc. It ran 2 years. And they took the hammer and they killed, like, the mid-campaign boss with it because they didn't believe me that I gave them the thing to kill the final boss at the end of the game. Now they have a really big damn problem because they just used the MacGuffin I gave them halfway through the campaign, so that when they get to the end of the campaign, there's just a huge problem. But what it did is it caused these conflicts all along the way. I told them in the first adventure, the main villain of the campaign is this guy. The only thing he fears on this planet is that hammer. Like, the whole conflict is he's trying to get that hammer from you. And you're trying to get the hammer someplace safe. And then just,
awesome.
You hit the guy with the hammer who annoyed you the most that day. Like, you know, we've gamed one whole year and you just hit the guy. I'm just like, all right, now we've got a real campaign on our hands. So, like, then we have this, like, whole, like the world's falling apart. The main bad guy has nothing to fear anymore, so he's doing everything with the maximum amount of hubris. Some of the best GMing I've ever done, because my party went off script so early. And you got to embrace that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. Perfect.
Yeah, they MacGuffin the MacGuffin.
So I've only got a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to do that to you. I'm sorry to have to bail.
No. I've had a fantastic time. No regrets. So,
same, man. Same. I'd love to be on again if you'd have me.
I would totally have you on. I feel like you and I could rap about RPGs forever.
which is funny because it's probably been 20 years since I've run a game.
Yeah. So do you have a Soulbound plans playing or running? Bring it all the way back to.
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah. Do you have any, like, plans of running? I think you mentioned Jack and Brent, and you're thinking about getting the Rerolling Ones crew. Are you going to be running, playing? Like, what's that? Yeah.
I'm definitely running. I'm the person with the background in it. I'm most excited to run it. I will definitely be playing with them. We don't know if we're going to be playing on the channel. We had big plans to play on the channel, but we have, a different camera setup, pointing at different people, that kind of thing. But that would have been a day where we would have been in person. So our state, sadly, is still in a shelter in place and hasn't moved to any of the phases of unlocking yet. So we're kind of playing it cool, keeping our distance right now. We don't want to be the reason that somebody gets sick.
Right.
So if we do it, we'll probably do it digitally like we're doing here. We might go through a couple of loops first and then take it to the channel if people are interested in watching that kind of content. I think people watching RPGs is probably a little bit more popular than people watching Battle Report, but our channel is definitely Battle Report centric, and that's not going to go away. It's what we do and what is important to us. So,
right on.
We didn't even touch on Battle Reports. Battle Reports suck.
Man, I had it in my notes here at the very beginning, the top of the show, Battle Reports suck. And then that was my beat, and that was how we were going to start the show. And we're ending. And isn't that, like, that's role-playing. That's it.
Yep.
Maybe next time to be continued. To be continued. Next time you'll tell me why Battle Reports suck. In case anyone doesn't know.
I'll tell you all about it.
Yeah. In case anyone doesn't know, where do they find you, man?
Yeah.
So, in case anyone doesn't know, where do they find you? YouTube.
I'm sorry. You can find me at Televated on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter sometimes. And you can find my YouTube channel at Rerolling Ones. It's all one word.
Rerolling Ones, and then the Instas, but that also will have to wait till the next time.
yeah. I'm a mini painter, so I love hanging on Instagram and getting the adulation of people I don't know.
There you go, brilliant. Gotta get them dopamine hits with the likes. Chat gang, Chat gang, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. Great conversation there. You're the show within the show. The reason we do this all. I'm gonna go raid Jacob Berry's stream. Shu, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for watching.
All right, good night, everybody.